Lawmakers right now, as again, the controversial bill is the main part of a special session that was called by Governor Greg Abbott. We heard from Abbott today, and we'll be playing out those remarks for you as he is not happy about what these Texas lawmakers have decided to do. Does look like they're going to start here. We don't want to miss a bit of that. We'll be breaking down what this voting bill is and why there's so much tension in the next 30 minutes or so with a election law expert. But let's listen in now to Washington, D.C. with Texas legislator.
Let's see what this hit looks like first before we share our barbecue. Depending on how this goes.
Ask John Cornyn about the barbecue.
San Antonio.
Austin.
San Antonio, you know that, San Antonio.
Oh, don't start that fight, please. People,
We'll lose the quarrel.
people, yeah, well, exactly. So, okay. Y'all gonna let us know when you're ready?
Where are we on the live shot?
51st Street.
2 minutes.
Check it out.
Okay, 2 minutes.
It's locally owned. No, it's a restaurant. It's a little. Yeah, exactly.
You'll have to give me an audible because I can't really see hands with these lights. So. We'll introduce ourselves. Yes, absolutely. I'll start off and then we'll introduce the next speaker for you. Yep, absolutely. Where you're from? Yeah, district number doesn't matter. Yeah. Say your city.
Hi, I'm similar.
Virgo.
We actually more.
Everyone's ready?
They said 2 minutes.
All right, good evening. Thank you for meeting us out here. My name is Chris Turner. I'm a state representative from Grand Prairie, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Texas House Democratic Caucus. Some of the finest and bravest public servants you will ever see. And I'm so proud of this group that is standing here behind me and our other companions and colleagues who are en route to join us this evening and tomorrow morning. Today, more than 50 Democratic members of the Texas House left Austin and left Texas. Not because we want to. It breaks our heart that we have to do it. But we do it because we are in a fight to save our democracy. The nationwide Republican vote suppression efforts, anti-voter efforts, is coming to a crisis point in the state of Texas right now. We're at the beginning of a special session where Republicans are rushing through new anti-voter bills in the House and the Senate. Of the diversity of Texas who are pleading with the legislature, say, do not make it harder to vote in Texas, which is the hardest state to vote in already. And Republicans continue to ignore them because they are determined to do whatever it takes to curry favor with the Donald Trump base, which is the Republican Party now, and continue to promote the big lie that somehow Donald Trump actually won the last election that we all know he lost. What's worse is they disrespect the voters of Texas. And they disrespect the members, the diverse members who represent those communities all across the state of Texas, from South Texas to West Texas to North Texas to East Texas. And that's why we are here. We are determined to kill this bill in this special session, which will end on August the 7th. And we will stay out until then in order to do that. We are going to use that time to plead with our friends and our colleagues and our leaders in the Congress that the time is now. There is no more time. You must pass strong federal voter protection legislation, and you must do it now. You must do it before the August recess. Our democracy is at stake. That's what's on the line. That is why we are here. And now it's my privilege to introduce someone who is a hero to everyone right here, the Dean of the Texas House of Representatives Democratic Caucus, Miss Infronia Thompson from Houston.
Hi. I'm a member of that committee that sat through that marathon hearing, some 23 hours and 35 minutes. And all of my constituents' desires were denied. Let me tell you why I left. I left because I am tired of sitting as a hostage in a Texas House of Representatives while Republicans strip away the rights of my constituents to vote. We have fought too long and too hard in this country to get away from having to count beans in a bag, having to count bubbles in a soap bar. And we have achieved the full right to vote in this country. And when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill in 1965, I thought that would put to rest forever anyone's desire to strip away the rights for anyone to vote. When I look at the fact that we go to Iraq to fight a war and give those persons the right to vote over there, and yet in our own homeland we have citizens who are a part of this country, the fabric of this country, we want to strip away their rights. And that is the reason why that we are refusing to be allowed to remain Republican hostages in the Texas House of Representatives. Please allow me to reintroduce my colleague, Trey Martinez Fisher from Bexar County.
Thank you, Ms. C.
Hey.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I am Trey Martinez Fisher from San Antonio, Texas. Being around Chairwoman Thompson, you learn something every day. As a member of the committee, she heard a lot and saw a lot, and we can talk about the proposal that we walked away from to defend democracy. Ms. Thompson reminded me of a time when you could show up to vote and you went into a booth, you can close a curtain, and you could vote in privacy. Under the provisions of this bill, you could literally have a voter walk through a polling place, be greeted by the Proud Boys, and they can stand over your shoulder and watch you vote close enough to listen if you were to whisper something to yourself, or close enough to see how you were casting your votes. That's the environment we're talking about. There is nothing special about this special session. This is a suppression session. This is a session to suppress our voting rights. And every man and woman standing here, and those Democrats that we know that are safe and secure in other states, we're not going to put up with that. Democracy is on the line. The eyes of the nation are on Texas. And we came here a few weeks ago with about 20 men and women to make our case to the U.S. Senate. This time we brought a little reinforcements. We have courage, conviction, and a little bit of defiance. And we're here today to rally the nation, and we hope that the U.S. Senate will hear us. And we hope that they will hear us and they will act to pass the For the People Act before the August 6th recess. We can see what's happening in this country. We know Leader Schumer has laid out a very ambitious agenda before the August 6th recess, and we want voting rights to be on that agenda. We want to vote up or down. We want to know who you are. And are you with us? We will be on the Hill this week. We are going to be working hard. This is a working trip. Everybody here is committed to doing it. And before this gets lost in the discussion, you need to understand we are citizen lawmakers. We don't get professional salaries. We're husbands. we're wives, we're single parents, we have businesses, or we're somebody's employee. Understand the amount of emotion that is going on with us, not just on this politics, not just on the governor incidentally referring to us as, I guess, animal or property to say that he will corral us and he will cabin us in the Capitol to get this agenda. Understand the emotion of everybody up here and what we're leaving on the table with our families and our personal lives. But that's how important our democracy is. And that's why we were here, and we're here to bring our message. And so at this time, I'm happy to bring up to this podium the chairwoman of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, my friend, Representative Nicole Collier, chairman from Fort Worth, Texas.
Thank you. We are here today. My name is Nicole Collier. I am from Fort Worth, Texas, and we're here today because our backs have been against the wall. We had no other option. There was nothing left to give. And so we took a stand and we left the state of Texas because that was the best and the right thing to do at the right time. And let me tell you this, who decided that one constitutional right deserved greater deference than the other? I'll tell you who. That's Texas. Texas, the Republican legislature decided that your right to carry a gun was more important than your precious right to vote. That's right. We don't believe that one constitutional right deserves greater deference than the other. They're no greater than the all. They all deserve equal consideration and equal protection. And so we came today because we know that the Texas legislature, the Republican-led legislature, they're not trying to make these elections fair or free. It is not fair to require people to jump through hoops and fill out multiple forms just to vote. We're not free when people can be criminalized like Hervis Rogers for simple mistakes. We're not free when you promote the rights of partisan poll watchers over the rights of others. So we're not going to take it. We had the courage to take a stand, and Congress, we need you to finish it. That's right. I want to introduce my colleague and friend, the Speaker Pro Tem of the Texas Legislature, Representative Joe Moody from El Paso.
Hey, everyone, Joe Moody from El Paso, if you couldn't tell. The voter suppression going on in Texas is just the tip of the iceberg. The clock is literally ticking on Congress to act to protect voters in Texas and all across the country. We put everything on the line. The entire legislative branch of the Texas government has been zeroed out. Our budget has been zeroed out in an act of tyranny because we refused to pass a bill like they wanted to force through. A toxic piece of legislation. Now, lives of thousands of Texas public servants and the freedoms of millions of Texas voters are on the line. Now, I know this. We're here to fight.
That's right. That's right.
We just hope we're not alone. Because democracy itself sits at 1 minute to midnight. And we need immediate federal action to turn back the clock. Thank you.
Good job, man.
Great. So, members of the press, we are planning a full press conference tomorrow morning where we'll visit with you more then. We'll take 3 questions right now.
Question for you. You said that you want to see this For the People Act passed at the federal level. That has had a vote. All Democrats voted to advance that debate. What has changed? What are you guys going to say here now in D.C. to try to change minds?
Sure. So what has changed is Texas is now in a special session to again pass an extreme anti-voter measure. It's going to make it more difficult for people to vote. And so we want to use this extreme example of what Greg Abbott and Republicans in Texas are doing to implore the Democratic senators to do what it takes to get the bill passed. And obviously that's a conversation about the filibuster, and I don't really care how they do it, But the reality is there are carve-outs on the filibuster in the U.S. Senate on different issues. We believe there's no more important issue than the right to vote for all American citizens to be able to cast a ballot, and we are going to communicate that to senators on Capitol Hill and to the American people more broadly, that is why we are doing this, and they have to act now.
Chris,
John Lewis.
CBS. To constituents who elected you to do a job, to be in Austin and debate these issues, and they see you leaving the state today, and may think they're running away from their responsibilities.
Nothing could be further from the truth. We are doing our jobs. We were elected to represent our constituents and fight for our constituents' interests, and that is why we are here. Because we're not going to sit in Austin in the House chamber and watch the Republican majority steamroll the voting rights of our constituents. So we're fighting back. We're leaving so they can't do that, and we are using our collective voice to deliver a message to the Congress. We are fighting for our constituents. Well, our intention is to be out of Texas until this session is over.
And if he calls another one right away?
That's our message to Congress. We need them to act now because they will keep calling these sessions to pass voter suppression legislation. So we need Congress to act now. We've got about 3 weeks until this session is over. That the clock is ticking. They got to act before the August recess.
Last question.
Last question.
President Biden is expected to talk about voting rights tomorrow. Would anything less than a call to abolish the filibuster be viewed as a disappointment from you all?
I'm glad the president is delivering the speech tomorrow. I'm looking forward to listening to it. And what I hope the president is going to say is that he expects the Congress to do what it takes to pass federal voting rights legislation, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which is critically important for us in Texas to have both. So I'm looking forward to the president's words tomorrow. We'll visit with y'all more tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome.
You're just listening in to Texas lawmakers who touched down in Washington, D.C. as they leave Texas in an effort to block the passage of a voting bill. To break down that voting bill, I want to bring in our very own Jessica Levinson, our election law expert. She comes on the show quite often. Jessica, thank you for being with us here on this Monday.
Thanks for having me. It seems like the evergreen topic, Texas and voting rights.
Yep, absolutely. So let's break down a little bit of the history of this for people who maybe haven't been following Texas politics. How have we gotten to the point we're at right now?
So, well, how far back should we go and where should we begin? So this actually is the second time that we have seen this particular voting bill or an iteration of this particular bill come before Texas. And previously, the Democrats, I think it was now a few months ago, actually walked out and said, we're done here. You can't vote on this. And people wondered what's going to happen when it comes up again. And we know what's going to happen. And this is somewhat similar to something that happened a number of years ago when I think Democrats in Texas actually left for Oklahoma for a number of days to deprive Republicans of a quorum. The question, of course, is how long can Republican lawmakers stay out of state, and at what point will they look at the political winds and make a decision either way?
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point. We were talking logistically about this. How long do they have to stay out of town? What does this mean for the special session back in Texas? We heard from Governor Abbott, and he's pretty much telling them, get back home.
Right. Well, so as long as they are not there, the special session cannot continue. Mm-hmm. So they don't have a quorum. They can't act. For all of your viewers who either have served on a government board or have been in a private corporation where they say, okay, do we have a quorum? We can't begin without, really, that's just a fancy word for, do we have enough people here to start voting? And so if the Democratic lawmakers decide to wait it out for weeks, the state legislature cannot act. They can't do anything. Eventually, all of these people will have to come home. I just saw on Twitter there was a state legislator who is there with her infant child. People cannot stay in DC forever. Then the question will be, will Governor Abbott call another special session, or will he say we're waiting until the next regular session? And will we just be doing this over and over again? I mean, Democratic lawmakers can't continue to storm out every time this happens. I think what they're hoping is that the political winds will change enough that Republicans say, okay, forget it, let's try and move on other issues.
Jessica, how common is this? Has this happened in other state legislatures as well?
So I'm sure there have been some instances of this in state legislatures throughout our country, but is this common? No, this is not a typical tactic. I mean, there's a reason that you and I are talking about it, right? That this is still newsworthy. And I think behind everything that we're talking about, Dakota, is the idea of how important voting rights are. And what Republicans would say in Texas is we're trying to uphold the integrity of our election system. We're trying to prevent fraud. What Democrats would say is there's really no evidence of fraud. And what you're trying to do is prevent a state that is about to turn purple from turning purple and then blue. And I think there is an important discussion to be had there in the sense that the demographics in Texas are changing. And we have seen this battle for months, if not years, in Texas, dealing with how restrictive or lenient the voting rules will be. Obviously, it has huge implications for the residents of Texas, and it has huge implications in the Electoral College. I mean, Texas has a behemoth, it has a ton of electoral votes. And so I think both sides know that voting is the foundational issue. You can, want to fight all you want about immigration and the environment and reproductive choice, but the voting rights is the blueprint. It's what will help determine the outcome of all of those other issues. And that's why you see, to answer your question, this rarity. That's why you see lawmakers getting on a plane and saying, we're done. I mean, this isn't how it's supposed to work, right? You're supposed to have some sort of consensus.
Right, exactly. Not walkouts during these sessions. Just to give a little more background information to everyone, this is SB 7 that we're talking about. This is different than the voting rights bills that we've talked about federally on the show in the past. The proposed bill, it would crack down on several initiatives from Harris County, which is one of the biggest Democratic-controlled counties. It would ban 24-hour polling places, ban ballot drop boxes, ban drive-through voting, and ban local election officials from proactively sending mail-in ballot applications to voters. It also gives additional power to partisan poll watchers and adds new voter ID requirements to absentee ballots. What does this mean for the future of voting bills just like this one in other states too?
So this is happening at a really interesting moment, and thank you for breaking that down. And this is what we typically see in these, what I would view as more restrictive voting bills, right? Which is you eliminate the time that you can vote, and then you eliminate the places that you can vote. So you have fewer, for instance, drop boxes, the time meaning less early voting. And then you add procedural thresholds. So instead of saying, here's your mail-in ballot, like I'm speaking to you from California, where essentially the state is going to mail us a ballot, you have to request those things. So there's all these ways that states can make it more difficult to become part of the process. The voter ID laws, they can determine which IDs are acceptable, and if you need a photo ID, and what type of photo ID. And all of these things we know can depress turnout among certain constituents. And look, this is no secret. All of these laws tend to more deeply affect Democratic voters, which is why you see oftentimes, I think, Democrats saying, don't do this, and Republicans saying, we want to do this. That's just, I think, the reality of where we are in America today. Now, you asked me a really good question about what this means for voting laws in other states. And I actually think that question is largely answered by that really important Supreme Court case, Dakota, that we saw now a week and a half ago, where the Supreme Court basically said, if you want to challenge voting laws based on the Voting Rights Act, you're going to have a really, really hard time doing that, So I don't think it's just what Texas might do. It's the Supreme Court signaling that what Texas might do is likely permissible, is likely legal, and then you will see other states follow, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note, like you said, this is not common. This doesn't happen usually during sessions, and there's history to this. They're saying that Democratic lawmakers from Texas are saying that there's been marathon hearings. They're rushing to get this passed through and ignoring their voices. So there's a lot that's led up to this decision to officially walk out and go to Washington, D.C. But I mean, are they going to be successful in making a stance, or are they just going to have to come back to Texas? I think that's my final question here is what are your expectations for the future of this bill?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that one. So it's short-term success, to be sure, in the sense that the voting laws will not pass today or tomorrow or probably next week. The long-term is the big question, and I think Democratic lawmakers know very well, and Republican lawmakers know very well, what we were just talking about, which is if the laws do pass, I don't think that they are vulnerable to legal challenge under the current state of the Voting Rights Act. And that's why typically we would have a two-part conversation, right? Will it pass? And then will it be challenged? And will the challenge be successful? In this case, as a result of that Arizona decision that the Supreme Court just made, where they said, if you want to use the Voting Rights Act to challenge a law, then you're going to have to prove a lot. You're going to have to marshal an enormous amount of evidence to show disparate impact, to show bad effects. Then I think that once this law passes, basically it says to me that it very, very likely will be upheld. So you're going to see, I think, more of this happening, not just in Texas, but look at other states like Arizona, like North Carolina, like Georgia, obviously, like Florida, where we've already talked about restrictive voting laws. And now I think those laws will likely stand. I don't think Congress is going to implement that kind of floor of safety for voting protections, meaning this is really going to be a state-by-state situation where your voting experience could be very different depending on which state you live in.
Well, we heard from lawmakers that they're saying this is going to be a working trip. We also heard from reporters on the ground that voting rights is going to be a topic of conversation with President Biden tomorrow. So anything in particular that you're going to be looking for as this conversation will be ongoing and as these lawmakers are making their way to Washington, D.C. and are going to be hanging out for a little while?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big questions for both Democrats and Republicans on the national level is how hard President Biden will push to try and get through some sort of federal voting rights, because it's very popular among Democrats. And I think a lot of Democratic voters are saying to themselves, you control the White House, you control the Senate, you control the House. You've told me for a long time this is a foundational issue. And I want to see you push this through. Now, of course, the answer to that is you have to then eliminate the filibuster, because Republicans will block that type of legislation, I believe, in the Senate. And so the question will be, is this the moment where Democrats say, okay, enough, we're getting rid of the filibuster? All appearances are that's not the case. And so then I think the next question will be, is there some sort of compromise that both sides can cobble together? It used to be that both sides of the aisle would continue to vote for the Voting Rights Act, that continued to be kind of re-upped every few years. That's not our current political climate. But that's what I'm going to be looking for, how hard Democrats want to push, because they have to know that this is the issue that will determine so many other issues. This is the first domino, and so many things will follow from that.
Right. You also have to think about how this affects the relationship between Democrats and Republicans back in Texas, too, because they're not only talking about this bill, they're talking about other bills as well. So it'll definitely be interesting to watch in the future with Texas.
Absolutely. I mean, if you are a lawmaker in Texas, this has to be an extraordinarily acrimonious moment. I mean, this is really an epic type break where they do. I mean, you're exactly right. It's not just voting rights. Democrats are going to have to come home at some point, and they're going to have to work with Republicans on other issues. It's trite to say, but it's almost like we need marriage counseling for so many state legislatures to try and get them to a similar place, because who are the losers? I mean, the losers are the constituents who are saying, do something for me. Don't act like lawmakers. The whole point of having these deliberative bodies is that they deliberate and they come to some consensus. And if you look at all of the polarization data over the last, number of years, it just shows that we kind of move from this to this. Yeah. And I don't think that, a lot of people in America still live somewhere in the middle, and this doesn't serve them particularly well.
Right. Hoping that Texas is not representative of every other state, as this has definitely been interesting to watch. All right, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. There is no shortage of law and election news, especially with this voting rights conversation, which is making national news. So I'm sure we'll be having you on the show very soon here.
I hope so. And recall news out of California tonight. So maybe we'll talk about that sometime as well.
Yes, always, always. Thank you so much, Jessica. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a quick break here on Live Now from Fox. When we come back, there's two sides to this story. As we showed you earlier, Governor Greg Abbott speaking out tonight, not very happy about the decisions by the lawmakers in his own state. We'll play that out for you, as well as some of those supporters who are standing outside of the airport in Washington, D.C., awaiting Texas lawmakers and voicing their opinions when it comes to this voting rights bill. We'll see you back here in 2 minutes. And we're back here on Live Now from Fox. We just showed you some of those remarks from Texas lawmakers down on the ground as they have touched down in Washington, D.C. We'll show you some of this video really quick. You can see many of them arriving at the airport. Well, they weren't by themselves. They were met by some supporters down on the ground there. We'll play out some of that for you here on Live Now from Fox. Let's listen in.
It seems like it doesn't matter how many of us show up and speak out and testify. Things are still passing that shouldn't be passing. And so I really have this strong feeling that Texas representatives aren't representing Texans.
So So as you heard it right there, a lot of people coming out in support of Texas lawmakers saying that this voting rights bill, SB 7, is voter suppression, and lawmakers even saying that this is a fight to save our democracy. Well, we are also hearing from Governor Greg Abbott out of Texas. He posted to his social media a response to them walking out. Let's listen in.
Break a quorum of the Texas legislature and to abandon the Texas state capitol, that inflicts harm on the very Texans who elected them to serve. As they fly across the country on cushy private planes, they leave undone issues that can help their districts as well as help the entire state. Issues like property tax relief, funding to support sheriffs and law enforcement in high crime areas, funding for children in our foster care system, and funding for retired teachers. The Democrats must put aside partisan political games and get back to the job they were elected to do. Their constituents must not be denied these important resources simply because their elected representatives refuse to show up to work.
And to further break down the latest in Texas politics, our own Andrew Kraft spoke with a political reporter with the Washington Post to talk about this trip today and what it means.
Texas state Democrats have fled the state. And this is all in response to a special session of the legislature that is happening at the moment. They disagree with a package of voting rights legislation that is up for debate and a vote, and so they have left the state. And right now, we want to bring in Washington Post reporter Dave Weigel. Dave is joining me, I believe, from Washington. Dave, so nice to see you. One of the things that struck me is they're traveling to Washington, D.C. What did you make of that?
Sorry. They're traveling because their strategy has been to elevate what's happening in Texas and keep it in the national focus. That's what, in a lot of these states, there has been a debate over voting reform, over election reform. People got exercised and then it faded. In Georgia, for example, the fact that the All-Star game was canceled in Georgia as a kind of Major League Baseball protest of the Republicans' voting bill, Republicans months later have turned that around and blamed the whole thing on Democrats. So what Texas Democrats are not doing anything unprecedented. Remember, Texas Democrats, different group of them, fled the state 18 years ago to delay a redistricting bill. But coming to Washington, they're doing that because unlike 2003, they have a Democrat in the White House. They have a Democratic vice president who they want to emphasize and accentuate what they're doing.
And Dave, you mentioned back, I believe it was in 2003, they didn't go as far as Washington. I believe they went really just over the border into Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And so what does that send? We know they met with Vice President Harris, who has been really tasked by the administration with voting rights in her portfolio. Do you think there'll be some, message or announcement from the White House, maybe some gathering with them publicly now that they are traveling to Washington?
Yeah, remember, this is the second visit for a lot of these people, because you mentioned the vice president. Some of these Texas Democrats, after they walked out to end the regular session, Texas is one of a few states that has one legislative session every 2 years. This is a special one. They're doing that again. The president's going to make more remarks about election laws tomorrow. This has been a priority for the White House, but it's been responding to these actions in states, some of them swing states where Republicans have control, some of them places like Texas, Republicans won the last election, but by a little bit less than usual when they're passing these laws. The White House has been elevating all of these cases, so I think Biden is going to do more of that tomorrow. This is a fight they really do not mind having because it brings back Donald Trump, but it brings it back on an issue that most people don't agree with him on. It's dangerous, perhaps, if they're sparring with Trump on immigration, where his policies weren't very popular, but Biden's aren't popular either. On this, outside of the kind of MAGA base, the audience to listen to Donald Trump fight about the election and demand that states audit their vote, et cetera, that's been pretty exhausting to everyone outside of the Republican base. So it's a fight the White House is welcome beyond the policy itself, which they sincerely do want to change before 2022.
And Dave, let's talk about just like on the ground in Texas for now, because when this last happened, they did the same thing. They didn't travel as far, but we even heard from Texas Governor Greg Abbott at the time that he was going to veto the budget for the legislature, meaning that, he didn't want to pay these Texas state Democrats who basically fled their duties that they were elected for. And so what are the dynamics on the ground in Texas itself? I mean, without quorum, without them there, have they really just stymied this special session? Is it over before it really got started?
Well, that's important, the thing you just mentioned, because Texas is a part-time legislature. I think you make $600, something like that per month, $500. It's not a high salary that people were giving up. A lot of them, people remain lawyers while they're in the legislature. They hold their business. So, they also targeted the legislative staff. And I think what you're seeing here is that the sort of people who become legislative staffers in Texas want to be part of what's happening here. The risk, obviously, it was not enough of a threat, the risk of this income to stop Democrats from trying it again. And so I think they're doing a little bit of jujitsu. They're trying to emphasize the most dramatic parts of this, that the salary cut, like you're talking about, the flight across the country, like we've been talking about. They really want this in the public eye because they think, one, they don't have the votes to stop this if they stay in Austin. Two, they did succeed in some public pressure in changing what is in this bill, and they've seen this work. We've been talking about the Texas precedent. We've seen this happen in other states. In Oregon, Republicans are in the deep minority, but there's a similar quorum rule. Republicans in Oregon quit the state capitol multiple times in the last few years. The last time they did so, they left and denied a quorum. Democrats carved an agreement out and said, okay, we're going to give you a role in redistricting if you stop leaving, if you just pass the budget. So this as a tactic, I think Democrats see as legitimate. And the worst thing Republicans have been saying about it, beyond the pay cut, is it's hypocritical. That's not enough of an argument to stop people from acting in this way anymore. I mean, they'd say, well, okay, in a world where the filibuster exists, in a world where we're in the minority in Texas, we're going to take whatever tactics we can.
And Dave, we've just been showing some video from earlier today of a charter bus that went and picked them up from a hotel. We have a tweet that we just want to put up on the screen here. This, I believe, was sent to a reporter from Dallas there in Texas, but it's, like you said, they want to make hay about this, and they are. I mean, look at this photo. You can see it there. They're on this private charter flight to Washington, and so they're really kind of making the most of it, and it's kind of what you were alluding to there. What do you think, though, Texas Republicans will do? Do they have any recourse at this point? This bill, these package of bills are very controversial in the state, but we've seen a number of states pass similar ones. So what do you think this does going forward?
Texas's constitution gives the power to the minority to do this sort of thing. I mean, they haven't changed it. They have to amend the Constitution. Even though Republicans have been in charge of Texas for this entire century, really, this is not a rule that they're eager to change, really, since 2002. So no, they don't have much of a recourse. They can eventually. Now, what happened in Wisconsin? Every state's laws are a little bit different. What happened there is that finally Republicans found kind of a way they could gavel through what they needed. I'm so sorry, Wisconsin 2011, when Democrats quit the state legislature, left it to stop Scott Walker's union bill. They found a way to get this passed anyway. I don't see one in Texas law. There are probably smarter lawyers than me. For example, people who are lawyers, which I'm not, in Texas looking for a way. But the Constitution's pretty clear. This is a break glass maneuver that people don't do very often. But they're doing it because they looked at the rules and said, okay, we can get away with this, at least for now.
All right, Dave Weigel from the Washington Post. So good to see you. Thanks for coming on Live Now to break that all down. We'll see where it goes from here.
Great time. Thank you very much.
So obviously that was a conversation from a little bit earlier today. We'll be following all the latest out of Texas here on Live Now, but we're going to step away from that to go into the latest out of Florida, that condo collapse. We're getting one press briefing a day. Typically, we've had two in the past. Well, now we only have one in this morning. The death toll rose to 28 after the demolition has opened up new search areas. Let's go out to that update out of Surfside here on Live Now. Let's listen in.
The situation that is unfolding in Cuba. As you know, Florida is home to the largest amount of Cuban Americans in the country. The governor is actively monitoring the protests on the island. We remain steadfast in our support on the side of freedom and democracy. And as the governor stated yesterday, Florida supports the people of Cuba as they take to the streets against the tyrannical regime that has plagued them for so many decades. The next several days will be pivotal for the freedom-seeking people in Cuba in their decades-long quest for freedom. So we'll continue to actively monitor that, and we're prepared for any and all impacts that we may see with that situation unfolding. Buenos días. El gobernador está comprometido a continuar su apoyo aquí con el condado en esta tragedia de Surfside. También le queremos reiterar nuestro agradecimiento a todos los que están involucrados en esta operación, que ha sido algo que de verdad nunca nos hubiéramos podido imaginar, y estamos muy agradecidos a todo el apoyo que hemos recibido, a los socorristas, a todos que han brindado apoyo en esta tragedia tan terrible. Ayer el estado de la Florida, en colaboración con el condado de Miami-Dade, ha lanzado un sitio web que ayudará a las víctimas del colapso que necesitan ayuda. Los gobiernos federal, estatal y local, junto con el sector privado y las organizaciones caritativas, se han unido para garantizar que los sobrevivientes y las familias impactadas pueden recibir el apoyo que tanto necesitan después de esta tragedia. Si usted es un ser querido, necesita ayuda, puede visitar a www.surfsideassistance.com para obtener apoyo y asistencia de inmediato. Su información se enviará a todas las agencias correspondientes para ayudarlos a obtener la asistencia que necesitan. Sería negligente de mi parte si no reconociera la situación que se está desarrollando en la isla de Cuba. Como sabe, la Florida tiene la cifra más grande de cubanos americanos en todo el país. Estamos monitoreando muy acerca las protestas en la isla y el impacto que tendría en nuestro estado. Seguimos firmes del lado de la libertad.
So as she stays in Spanish right there, those first remarks were talking about Cuba. We'll be diving a little bit deeper into that story as unrest is in the streets of Cuba right now and over the past weekend. But did want to correct myself, the death toll rising to 94 people amid a recovery effort out in Surfside, Florida. You're going to hear the latest from Miami-Dade officials down on the ground as they give the latest numbers there. Want to apologize for that. Again, 94 people dead. Families are still being notified of the search efforts underway. Let's listen back in.
Good morning, everyone. Now we're here on day 19. We're glad to be joined this morning by our Lieutenant Governor, and I want to reiterate how grateful we are here in Miami-Dade County for the ongoing support, the unprecedented collaboration of our partners at the state, at the Florida Department of Emergency Management, FEMA. They've been by our side since the very beginning, and they have not left, and they will not leave. Our search and recovery continued over the last operational period with some brief interruptions due to lightning. The Weather Service is still embedded with our teams on site, so we can get real-time updates to make sure that with any weather changes, our first responders are protected from the elements to ensure their safety. They can resume their work following pauses as soon as it's safe to go back, and the Weather Service guides them. We do expect ongoing inclement weather over the next few days, so we expect that there will be a few brief pauses. Our team has continued as ever to work diligently to make progress on the collapse and to recover the remains and bring closure to the families as quickly as we possibly can. Through search and recovery, we have confirmed additional victims. The number of confirmed deaths is now 94. 83 of these victims have been identified and 80 next of kin notified. Please join me in continuing to pray for those we have lost, the families who are grieving, and those who are still waiting. I want to stress that the police and the medical examiner teams are continuing their around-the-clock work to identify victims. However, the process of making identifications has become more difficult as time goes on, and The recovery at this point is yielding human remains. At this step in the recovery process, we must rely heavily on the work of the medical examiner's office. They're undertaking technical and scientific processes to identify the human remains. The process is very methodical and careful, and it does take time. Miami-Dade Police Department detectives continue to make progress with their ongoing audit and the diligent research necessary to verify that all reports of the unaccounted are verified. I want to stress, as I have done before, that we can only truly account for a missing person who is deceased once the identification is made. And so there may be people who are deceased who remain on the unaccounted list until a positive ID has been made. 222 people are now accounted for, and 22 people are potentially unaccounted for. The numbers are fluid, and they will continue to change as these efforts continue. Our Family Assistance Center continues up and running, and now 207 unique families have been served on site. We have 20 agencies actively serving, and yesterday, as you heard from the Lieutenant Governor, we launched the online portal for families to more easily access financial assistance for their unmet needs. And it contains all of the state and federal and other sources so that it's a one-stop shop for them to get the help they need. And this includes grief counseling, mental health services, financial support, and many others. And we know that they are going to continue to need our support in the days, weeks, and months ahead, and we are here for them to provide all the resources that we can. And I'm also very proud to share that our partners at the Small Business Administration, through their great outreach and work, have already received 72 applications. 43 of those are business applications, 29 are homeowners and renters. So their assistance covers a wide array of those needing assistance. And as we continue to support our business community to bounce back from this disaster, I want to continue to urge our community to support the small and local businesses of Surfside and the surrounding area. And finally, I want to take this opportunity to reiterate our strong support of the peaceful protests unfolding across Cuba. We stand united with the Cuban people on the island and all across our own community at this historic moment in the struggle for freedom, dignity, and basic human rights. We stand with them and we pray for their courageous actions to begin to bring about real change and move us closer to a vision of a free Cuba. God bless the families and first responders. Buenos días, aquí estamos en el día 19. Nuestra búsqueda y recuperación continuó durante el último periodo operativo con algunas breves interrupciones debido a rayos. Sin embargo, nuestro equipo continúa trabajando tan diligentemente como siempre para avanzar en el colapso, recuperar los restos y llevar al cierre a las familias lo más rápido posible. Durante la búsqueda y recuperación hemos recuperado víctimas adicionales. El número de muertes confirmadas es ahora 94. 83 de estas víctimas han sido identificados y 80 familiares notificados. Ahora se contabilizan 222 personas y 22 personas potencialmente están desaparecidas. Los números son fluidos como siempre.
So as she goes into Spanish right there, just to recap what the latest is on the collapse. Again, this happened June 24th, so we're more than 2 weeks after the condo collapse here. 94 people dead. 83 of the victims have been identified, but we're hearing that the process of making identifications has been made a lot more difficult as time has gone on. At least 22 people remain unaccounted for at the site. Also, no word yet on the recovery operation and the timeline of it. They're saying that it would take weeks, but the exact timeline has remained uncertain throughout all of these press conferences. The fire chief saying, quote, "To give you an answer when we feel we'll recover everyone, I can't give you an exact date. We're doing everything that we can, everything possible, until we feel that we've delayered every floor." Just a little more background. The effort switched from a rescue to a recovery phase last week. Crews have been digging through the remaining pile of rubble, peeling layer after layer of debris in search of any remains of bodies. The unrelenting search has resulted in the recovery of over 14 million pounds of concrete and debris. They've been combing the site 24 hours a day since the collapse. Rescue workers searching not only in hopes of recovering human remains, but also possessions of any of those victims. The work so delicate that crews have found unbroken wine bottles amid the rubble. And we'll listen back in to some of the other officials here.
Good morning, everybody. I first want to touch on something that's become more and more apparent as the operation has gone on, and that is the significance of that site with respect to the people who have lost their lives there. We're having discussions now with the different levels of government, but most importantly, we're trying to understand what the families are wanting to do with the site. So that's something very important. And to that end, given it is a very, very sort of holy site at this point because we've lost so many lives, we're going to be tightening the security around that site, and it's only going to be authorized personnel that will be allowed near that site. And I think Director Ramirez is handling that, and I support that decision. I think that's the right thing to do because it's obvious that this has become much more than a collapsed building site. It is a holy site, for lack of a better word. This morning I also wanted to share a poignant bit of information gleaned during my visit to the site about an hour ago for the benefit of our families, which is my primary concern. As I talked with the overnight search teams, they described how carefully they are consistently going through the debris pile. As you know, the other day I talked about intact wine bottles being found. So carefully, in fact, that when they found a business card in the debris that listed the occupation of the card holder as an artist, they, as a result of that clue, began looking around and found paintings in the area, which they were able to pull out of the rubble and preserve for their family. This type of professionalism and compassion is emblematic of the amazing work that is being done at the site. The work overnight was halted several times for bad weather, as you heard, but the site and the debris pile, compared to yesterday, is nonetheless dramatically further reduced. In several locations of the pile, we are down to the parking area, and as a result, we're pulling out a good number of vehicles. Those vehicles are mostly terribly damaged, evidencing the violence of the collapse in those areas. The search continues until everyone trapped in the debris is pulled out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And our Creole translator, Yvonne Morisot.
Bonjour tout le monde. Malgré la pluie et les éclairs, nous continuons à chercher victimes yo, toujours. Chiffres yo continuent à augmenter. Kounia, nous avons confirmé dans le monde que nous joignons qui mourir un chiffre de 94. Nous avons identifié 83 là-dedans. Et puis tout, 80 familles qui ont recevoir notice là de moun sa yo que nous joignons. Processus là pour identifier moun qui est victime yo très difficile. Et il devient plus difficile à chaque moment. Médecins légistes a travaillé sans arrêter. Nous sommes capables de dire que nous joignons 222 personnes déjà. Et puis 22, nous avons cherché toujours. Encore, chiffre est capable de changer à n'importe quel moment. centre qui a assisté famille que nous déjà préparé, qui déjà là et qui existait, il y a un temps à bail service à près de 207 familles et il y a 20 dans l'agence qui là dans la localité ça. Ailleurs, nous démarrons un site internet pour bailler une assistance rapide à famille qui besoin de un accès encore qui plus facile pour être capable de joindre financement, pour être capable de continuer avec le problème ça qui est gain là. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. So, and also here to answer questions for you, we have FEMA Federal Coordinating Officer Tom McCool. We have Florida Division of Emergency Management Director Kevin Guthrie. We have the Division Director for the Office of Emergency Management, Deputy Incident Commander Charles Cyril. We have the Miami-Dade Police Department Director Freddie Ramirez, and the Miami-Dade Fire Deputy Chief Arthur Holmes, along with Erica Benitez, Director of Media and Public Relations for Spanish. First question, USA Today.
Yeah. So unfortunately, our chairman of the county commission, Pepe Diaz, and his chief of staff have tested positive for COVID, although they were both vaccinated. And in an abundance of caution, those of us who were in close proximity have been tested, and that has occurred.
To follow up on that, can you explain what your testing procedures are for everyone on site, including the crew? Is it daily, and are there any other positive cases so far?
So Chief Kaminsky previously reported about the cases that had arisen in one of the task forces, and that was contained, and there was significant contact tracing conducted. In this case, everybody who's come in close proximity has been tested, and using both rapid and longer-term tests. So we have been fully tested.
Is there regular testing?
There is testing available on site for if ever there's an indication and a need, and so that's what we're using, the facilities.
Madam Mayor, Spanish is requesting the same thing that's happening. Same response.
Okay. El jefe de la comisión y su jefe de operaciones también desafortunadamente están con COVID después de que eran vacunados, y por duda todos que estaban en contacto cerca con ellos han recibido pruebas para seguir adelante, y tenemos todo que necesitamos para las pruebas aquí en Surfside.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Madam Mayor, a quick question, please. With respect to those tests, all of them come back negative?
The rapid tests, yes, yeah. And then longer also.
Thank you. And Mr. Burkett, a quick question, if you would, sir. You spoke that I know volunteer efforts seem to be wrapping up at the Surfside Community Center, and the field kitchen there may be wrapping up.
All right, we're going to step away from this at the moment. We're going to go to a quick commercial break, but you've been listening to Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava. There's the Surfside Mayor, Mayor Burkett, give an update earlier today. We are only getting now one daily update from Surfside, and you can see there that they announced that now 94 confirmed fatalities, still several missing at the moment in the rubble. And so we'll bring more updates for you when we get them throughout the week, but it's just now into the third week since that condo collapsed in the middle of the night, and it is getting even more tragic as the days go on. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. When we come back from the break, we'll be breaking down everything that has been happening over the weekend in Cuba. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll be back in 2 minutes. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. We are going to be moving into a discussion about the recent protests that have been happening over the weekend in Cuba. But first, President Biden says the U.S. is standing with the people of Cuba tonight, following some of the largest anti-government demonstrations in decades. Fox News correspondent Phil Keating is in Little Havana, Florida, tonight with what people in that community are saying. Let's go out to Phil Keating.
An unheard of and unprecedented public demonstration against the Cuban communist regime in a dozen cities Sunday on the Caribbean island. Bold defiance to the government's tight grip on everything there, and exhausted with decades of poverty and food and medicine shortages, even accusing leadership of a failed response to coronavirus, for which the State Department was criticized after initially tweeting that was the reason, not inept communist rule. In Miami's Little Havana, Calle Ocho filled up with hundreds, if not thousands, of supporters in solidarity with the Cuban people, also calling for change, as they have for the past 50 years with no success. President Biden this afternoon.
The United States stands firmly with the people of Cuba as they assert their universal rights, and we call on the government of Cuba to refrain from violence or attempts to silence the voice of the people of Cuba.
Cuban-American Senator Marco Rubio posted this on Twitter.
Of course, COVID has a role to play, but this began well before COVID. These people are frustrated. They want to live in a normal country. They don't want to have their kids getting on rafts and having to leave the country in order to lead normal lives.
The Cuban president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, as usual, blamed the island's problems on the U.S. and its trade embargo. In a national address, he accused the U.S. of manipulating emotions and feelings through social media. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken says it would be a grievous mistake for the Cuban regime to blame what is happening there as a result of anything the U.S. has done.
The hour of freedom has arrived.
Miami's Cuban-American mayor joined the chorus for change.
People are dying, people are getting beaten, and people are suffering, and they're starving. And this has been happening for far too long.
Notably, most left-leaning Democrats were quiet on Cuba today, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. However, Senator Bernie Sanders did make a statement saying that he supports the right to protest everywhere around the world and stands by what he said in his 60 Minutes interview last year, that not everything in Cuba is bad. On the streets of Havana today and tonight, things are quiet, no demonstrations, and the internet and social media have largely been shut down. In Miami's Little Havana, Phil Keating, Fox News.
Phil, thank you. And right now we want to bring in Richard Feinberg. Richard, so good to see you. Thanks for being with us. You're a professor emeritus at the UC San Diego's School of Global Policy and Strategy, also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Richard, electricity is in short supply. COVID vaccines are in short supply. Fuel, food as well. There hasn't been a Castro in power now for the first time in 60 years. Do you think that's why we're seeing this at the moment?
Well, there's no doubt that the current government lacks the charisma of the Castro brothers. People had hoped that the new government would show a new generation of leadership, would promote serious and ongoing economic reform, but that hasn't largely happened. So among the reasons for the frustrations that we see on the streets throughout not only Havana, but many of the other towns in Cuba, is frustration with a relatively inert, passive leadership, as well as the problems that you emphasized at the top of the story, food shortages. Also, electricity blackouts have been occurring in recent days, and in a hot tropical climate, that's not fun. And then there has been this sudden resurgence of the COVID pandemic, which is tragic for families, but also impedes a restart of the tourism industry, which is so critical for the economy of Cuba.
Richard, we're just showing some video that we've obtained of the protests over the weekend in Havana, in Santiago. President Diaz-Canel alluded earlier to foreign actors and forces potentially being responsible for this, to which the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, responded, "It would be a grievous mistake for the Cuban regime to interpret what is happening in dozens of towns and cities as a result or product of anything the United States has done. Richard, do you think this is all at the moment responsible because of the current embargo that has been in place for decades?
Well, Andrew, there's no doubt that the socialist planning, management policies longstanding of the Cuban government have not produced economic prosperity. That's quite clear. On the other hand, it is a little hypocritical for the U.S. government to be squeezing as hard as it can the economy of the island and supporting over many, many years dissidents on the island, and then claim we have nothing to do with what's happening on the island. So come on, you know. So it's going to be both factors. It's U.S. pressures that certainly drive the economy further down a hill, but also, of course, the failures of the regime itself. And there's the interaction of those forces, which is fascinating to watch going forward. Now, what does the U.S. really want in Cuba is a very interesting question that's not obvious. Does any administration, including the Biden administration, really want to see a complete breakdown of civil order in Cuba? What might that produce? Suppose there's a civil war. Suppose there's massive out-migration. And then you have the drums beating in Little Havana saying the U.S. must now militarily intervene to restore order in Cuba. Is that the sort of situation that any administration, including the Biden administration, really wants to face? I think not.
Yeah, and Richard, I just wanted to read from some of the statement that the White House put out earlier today from President Biden. He said, in part, we stand with the Cuban people and their clarion call for freedom and relief from the tragic grip of the pandemic and from the decades of repression and economic suffering to which they've been subjected by Cuba's authoritarian regime. Now, from previous statements from past administrations, that is very strong language, calling Cuba an authoritarian regime. We didn't really see much of that language with former President Obama. We did a little bit with former President Trump, but you alluded to steps that the administration can take now going forward. What do you think they'll do?
Yeah, well, I think the Biden administration, unfortunately, has been focused mainly on the domestic politics of Cuba. During the campaign, Biden more or less said he would revert back to Obama's policies of engagement, of at least restoring travel opportunities and allowing Cuban Americans to send remittances to their families. None of that has happened yet, 6 months in. Why not? Presumably, this has to do with the domestic politics, trying to improve the probabilities that Democrats can retake some seats that were lost in southern Florida in the previous election. So those, it's been in domestic politics rather than the situation on the island, which seems to have so far occupied the policymakers in the Biden administration. So now suddenly, when there's rumbles on the streets, we don't have much influence. You know, if you're a Cuban government official, you heard Biden say one thing during the campaign, doing something completely different now in office. How can you trust him in any sort of negotiations? So I think the upshot of all this is that Biden may or may not be winning votes in South Florida. That's hard to judge at this point, but he certainly has lost influence in Havana. I think that's clear so far.
Yeah, and speaking of South Florida, Richard, we've been seeing some video all day of residents there in Little Havana coming out and hoping for, you know, a different type of economy, maybe regime change. Obviously, a lot of them escaped and came to southern Florida from Cuba's shores way back when. But, you know, a freer Cuba, Richard, is one of the very few bipartisan issues that both parties can really get behind. We're seeing that now, aren't we?
Well, everybody, of course, would like to see a more prosperous, more democratic Cuba. The issue for U.S. policy, though, is what can the United States government do to make that outcome more likely? That's the issue. It's a tactical question. And there are divisions. There are at least the Obama team, and I think most Democrats actually think that, you know, trying to a policy of engagement which reduces some of the pressures, which supports the local private sector. The private sector in Cuba depends very much on tourism and remittances and private investment, and that is more likely to, over time, produce an opening on the island. Other people who have dominated U.S. policy towards Cuba over 60 years say, no, keep the pressure on, and somehow that'll produce change. But they never actually indicate, well, what are they favoring? An explosion? well, that's you never know what that would result in. I think we saw on the streets of Little Havana in Miami recently a call for U.S. military intervention. And I think really that is what some of the exiles have always hoped, because they know they can't really win by themselves on the island. So they're hoping that there's enough disorder in Havana to provoke to prevent an immigration crisis, to provoke a major U.S. military intervention. Now that would be a huge headache for American foreign policy. And I can tell you from my time within the U.S. government, the Defense Department and the U.S. security apparatus does not look with favor on having to land tens of thousands of U.S. troops on the island of Cuba again.
Richard, just a few more questions. We have the time to get into this
Sure.
story.
Thank you, Andrew.
It's very fascinating because we haven't seen the likes of protests like this in some time. What do you think on the ground, the Cuban government, President Diaz-Canel, what's going through his mind right now?
Yeah, well, of course, it's not a very transparent government, so this would be very speculative to respond. I can't imagine they're not worried. I mean, they have to see the desperate economic situation, which continues to get worse. There was a 10% economic decline at least last year, and this year again, a further decline, plus another outbreak of COVID. They have to be concerned. Not only at what's going on in Havana, but I think what we also have to watch, you don't have cameramen there, but in the more provincial areas where the situation is actually even more desperate, and there's even more hunger and perhaps more COVID. So they have to be concerned. I was able to watch today, thanks to the internet, a press conference that Diaz-Canel and his cabinet treated the Cuban people with. And I think watching that, they did recognize the problems. The press conference lasted well over an hour, and they indicated the measures they are taking, not to solve these problems, but to try to manage them better. It was a rather sober, I think, realistic presentation. So if I were a Cuban watching this, I think I would say, well, the situation's rough, but at least the government knows there are problems and they're sort of doing the best they can. But I also noticed that Diaz-Canel looks like he's gained a little weight, and the other ministers look rather well fed as well. So I think the average Cuban might think, those guys up there, they're not hurting the way I'm hurting. And there are some severe inequalities in this alleged communist state.
And Richard, just last question for you. Going forward into the next several days, do you think the government will shut down kind of lines of communication, the internet, cell phone signals, things like that, if they haven't done so already?
Well, what we are hearing is that they have, at least episodically, tried to shut down some of the social media, and I wouldn't be surprised if they would continue to do that. I think so far, as best as one can tell from here, they've tried to not respond with an overly heavy hand. I haven't heard any suggestions of shooting into the crowd or that sort of severe repressive measures. So I think they're hoping they can contain it without resorting to overt violence. But this has been the big question. If anything, the surprise over the weekend was how long it took for the obvious frustrations and discontent in Cuban families, how long that took to be manifest in street demonstrations. That's been the surprise. Now, was this a one-shot affair, or will the demonstrations accumulate and become greater over the next several days or weeks? And as we move into the hot summer, if the electricity shortages continue, you don't want to live in a high-rise in Havana without electricity. It gets very uncomfortable. And of course, your refrigerator and everything in it gets rotten. So that's a very explosive situation that we could see this summer in a hot Havana.
Yeah, and obviously with the recent events last week going on in Haiti with the assassination of their president, very volatile region at the moment there in the Caribbean.
Absolutely.
I just want to read lastly from one last sentence
Have we
from
forgotten
the
the
statement.
situation in the so-called Northern Triangle of Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, that we were so focused on 1 week ago? Not to mention the declining situation, the very sad, tragic situation in Nicaragua, in which Daniel Ortega and his wife apparently have decided they want to stay in power, until the sun sets, at the end of the century, and locking up all of their opponents very tragic. So really throughout the Caribbean basin, we see a lot of social and political pressures, which why I think the U.S. government, any administration, really now has to develop a region-wide, integrated, comprehensive policy, so it doesn't look like it's jumping and reacting from one crisis to the next, but really has an approach to the entire region.
No, definitely. We'll leave it at that. Just wanted to leave with one last sentence from the president's statement today. He says the U.S. calls on the Cuban regime to hear their people and serve their needs at this vital moment rather than enriching themselves. So pretty strong words from the White House. Richard Feinberg, thank you so much for coming on Live Now from Fox as we track all the developments out of Cuba at this moment in time. We'll see you again, hopefully.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me.
All right, we were showing you just a pretty stunning video on the streets of Havana over the weekend where you saw there many angry Cubans taking to the streets, pelting police cars with rocks or anything in front of them, thousands marching to complain about food shortages, many moving into the streets to disrupt traffic, chanting for freedom, saying they've had enough. Police initially followed behind the march, but some protesters threw cobblestones at police. And so they also made a number of arrests, and the march eventually did disperse, but others later arrived to shout slogans in favor of Cuba's late president, Fidel Castro. Remember, just with our conversation with Richard Feinberg there is no longer a Castro in power. Just several months ago, Raul Castro relinquished duties in the country and to President, kind of the heir apparent, Miguel Diaz-Canel there in Cuba. And so we'll be following all of this, Cuba in its worst economic crisis in decades, also with coronavirus cases surging there. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us on Live Now from Fox. We're going to take just a quick 2-minute commercial break. We'll be back with more after. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Hope you had a great weekend and are getting a good start to your week here on this Monday. There have been a lot of stories already. We want to continue there in South Florida at the moment because we want to hear from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He spoke out today about a number of different topics, including Cuba, what we were just discussing there, also the Surfside condo collapse, now into recovery efforts into its third week after it collapsed, and police and the budget in the state of Florida. Here's Governor Ron DeSantis from earlier.
Not something that just goes on continuously. They have at certain times but they really love doing the different rides, and they love doing the junk food. And so we're looking to figure out, and we've done some other ones around the state, but I think this is the one that they remember the most. So we'll be sure to make it a back. They told me about what they do down the street here with the food trucks. So I got to figure out how can I do the schedule to do that. But I tell you, if I unleash my kids with those food trucks, there's going to be a lot going on. They're going to really love that. I also want to thank Dane Eagle, who's our executive director of the Department of Economic Opportunity, and then Jamal Sal, who's the head of Enterprise Florida. And they're here with me today because our announcement is real exciting. We're going to be able, through the Department of Economic Opportunity, we're going to be able to announce $29 million in grants to 42 small and rural communities throughout the state under the Florida Small Cities Community Development Block Grant Program. And that includes $700,000 right here for the city of Green Cove Springs. And so this money will allow the city of Green Cove to do 3 neighborhood revitalization improvement projects. First, be able to use to replace a storm water pipe that is more than 50 years old and install sidewalk, curb, asphalt, and landscape on West Street. Second, the funding will be used to install nearly 1.5 miles of sidewalk on Highland Avenue and Center Street. And then finally, the funding will be used to install picnic tables and benches at Vera Francis Park. So this program, these grants, can only be awarded to cities with a population of less than 50,000 or in a county with an unincorporated population less than 200,000. And so with today's announcement, since I became governor, we've awarded nearly $60 million in block grants to small cities and to rural communities across the state. And since I became governor, through this, we've done $9 million through the Department of Economic Opportunity just to Clay County alone. And I was, joking with some of these guys. Clay County has been able to punch above its weight in many respects. I mean, when I became governor, the appropriations chairman in both the House and the Senate were both from Clay County, and they did very well for this area. And then I know you've got a lot of good folks in the legislature still, some other folks that will be in leadership in the future. So I think it's been a community that's been able to produce a lot of people that have made a lot of positive impact, and I think you see that with how thriving the community is. So we're excited about being able to do this. We also understand as we go on through particularly the rest of this year, I've got a lot in my job growth grant fund. I've got $75 million between what was left over from last year. I actually had to veto it last year because we didn't know with COVID what the revenue would be like. So we've got about $75 million there, and that can be used for workforce or for infrastructure. Well, we've done a lot on workforce. We've done a lot on apprenticeships. We're doing a lot on that. We've been able to use, I think, strategically federal funds to do that. And we've done that with infrastructure too. But I think we're going to have an opportunity with the Job Growth Grant Fund to work with local communities, both on the municipal and county level, identify some infrastructure needs. Obviously, they have to put up some money too, and then we could do it and hopefully be able to get a lot of projects done in the not too distant future. So you can apply on that. All the local communities can apply for the Job Growth Grant Fund, and we'll look at those applications. And basically, we want to use our resources to be able to make the biggest impacts across Florida. And I know that there'll be opportunities for us to be doing that here in Northeast Florida. So we're excited about what's going on in Clay County. We're excited what's going on in Northeast Florida. I think that there's I was talking with the sheriff beforehand about needs in law enforcement, and it's not as easy to recruit people as it used to be. But I'll tell you, we want to make sure that whatever challenges there are, I can tell you, if you have a chance to do law enforcement in Florida versus some of these other jurisdictions, you're much better off in Florida because we'll actually stand by law enforcement. And as you had a lot of people last year, these municipalities were trying to slash funding. They were attacking law enforcement. We came up and said, you know what, in the next legislative session, we're not defunding police, we're going to fund them with bonuses. And so we ended up getting the $1,000 bonuses for all sworn law enforcement, fire, and first responders and EMT. And part of that was a recognition of all the people hands on deck during COVID. There were other people working from home. fire and police, they couldn't work. I mean, they had to do their job and they had to be out there protecting people, but then also just how poorly a lot of the law enforcement had been treated in different parts of the country. We wanted to make sure that we were stepping up and supporting them. And then, of course, we saw with the terrible collapse of the building in Surfside, those search and rescue and those firefighters, they were there immediately on the scene, and it's been basically 24/7. Obviously, if there's, when the rest of the building was brought down, they had to stop, and if there was lightning there, so there were some times where they stopped, but unless there was things beyond their control, they did it nonstop, and it was all in an attempt to be able to try to rescue people. So that was something where you take, I don't think we do, but I think some take it for granted. But then when you have those types of situations, those are the folks who are there to be able to handle these situations that happen. And obviously this building is kind of a once in a lifetime type thing. It was really, really tragic, and we'll obviously be able to get all the answers in due time about exactly why it happened. But you have all these things that can happen. Who do you want there doing it? You need the people in uniform to be able to do that. So we're happy to be able to be standing up. And I do think you will see, I think you've already seen, but there are people in these police departments and other parts of the country who, if they can get a job in Florida, they want to come to Florida to be able to do it because the culture is better and they understand that they're going to be supported much more resolutely than what they do. But make no mistake, the reason you have huge spikes in crime in many parts of the country is because of not standing up for law enforcement, having weak policies where you let people out and you're not prosecuting people who are committing habitual offenses. That is clearly causing disastrous consequences. And actually what they will do in some of these jurisdictions, they will say, oh, well, you know, arrests are down for whatever, over a year because they're not arresting anybody. And so it's like they decided not to prosecute, and so they act like that because the arrests are down, that the actual offenses are down, but that's not true. The offenses are up. They're just not being held accountable, so it doesn't show up in the statistics, and that's very irresponsible to be able to do. But that's what you get in some of these jurisdictions where they've gone down that road. So we're happy to be supportive of law enforcement. I do think we should look at what do we need to do. I know we've done some stuff with the corrections to try to make that a little bit more of a valuable enterprise, but it was, the pay is not great. We've done some stuff to increase that, and obviously you have in the municipal and the county level as well. You got a lot of people that are working really hard. We want to make sure that we continue to attract good people. At least you'll know in Florida you're going to have support. And then we're looking forward to seeing what we'll do in the next legislative session. We're working on a bunch of different things, and we'll have some announcements as we get into the fall about how to move the ball forward even more for the state of Florida. But I think we were really productive this year, and I think we'll be able to build on those successes going forward. Part of that, though, is to make sure we've got some really big populated areas. They're great, and they do a lot for the state, but we've got to make sure that we're tending to our small municipalities and some of our rural communities, and so that's why we're here today with this great announcement of almost $30 million, and we're going to be here, we're going to be in Taylor County, and then we're going to be in Liberty County providing awards for a lot of these different areas. So I'm excited, and I'd love to have Dane Eagle and Jamal come up and say a few words.
Well, thank you to our governor for his leadership, and thank you all for being here today. The Department of Economic Opportunity, where I get to serve as the head, thanks to the governor, we are three silos. We're workforce development, we're business development, and we're community development. And those are three legs of the stool of economic development. And without one of them, that stool falls. So it's why it's so important that we're here today to announce these community development block grants. Now we're doing $29 million in 42 different communities, as the governor mentioned, but $700,000 is going right here in Green Cove Springs, which is the larger end of those grants that we're doing. And we're going to be in two other stop cities the governor mentioned, but we wanted to make sure we were here this morning in Green Cove and Clay County and show our support. That $700,000 is going to go to replacing, as the governor said, 50-year-old stormwater drain pipe system, new sidewalks, and help rehabilitate the huge in moving forward. Our department is going to be working very closely with the local leaders here. You have a stellar legislative delegation, as the governor mentioned. Look forward to working with them again next session. But we're going to be back. We look forward to helping implement this grant program and doing more for economic development in the area and the state of Florida. But thank you to the governor for his leadership. Thank you to my partner in crime, good crime that is, Secretary Sowell, and we'll turn it over to him next.
All right. So at Enterprise Florida, we tell the world what the state has to offer. As a state, our governor has showed everybody that we are supportive of law enforcement. We invest in our communities when it comes to workforce and infrastructure. So for anyone here who's listening today who's in law enforcement and wants to be in a place that's friendly, come to Florida. If you want to have a place that's friendly for business, come to Florida, but also look at Clay County. So everything that we do supports workforce, infrastructure, and helps communities thrive so they can attract jobs. So as we go around the state today with Secretary Eagle and the governor and people who care about our state, I want to tell the world that Florida is open for business. We're supportive of the men and women in uniform, and we want you to come here. Thank you.
All right.
City of Green Cove would like to thank the governor. If there's one thing Green Cove recognizes, it's leadership, and we are fortunate and blessed to have Governor DeSantis as our governor and present here in Green Cove Springs. I've remarked many times that we are the best kept secret of Northeast Florida. We spoke this morning of the park, where 1,000-year-old water bubbles to the surface, moves into the pool, falls into the run, and then into the beautiful St. John's, surrounded by live oaks. So it's my hope that we can extend an invitation to everybody here this morning to share the park. And I always say, once I get you into the park, I can guarantee you one thing, that you're going to come back. Thank you, Governor.
And that, this food truck, I mean, how many people do you get for that on, you get 5,000?
That's our high water mark.
Okay.
We get 18 food trucks surrounding the park, and we have some of the best bands.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's quite a time.
And it's the second Friday of every month?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So second Friday of every month. We'll put something out on our social media about it. But you better be careful though, because you may get an influx, and you guys may be wishing. So we'll do that, and we'll try to make it here for that. But I definitely look. The schedule's always in flux, but I don't see how I'm going to get out of not bringing my kids to the Clay County Fair next year. I just think that they won't let me get away with that. So we're happy to be here, and we really thank for having such a great working relationship with both municipal, county level, and then obviously their delegation in the state legislature has been great, and we've worked very closely with them for a number of years. And so we'll keep making progress for Florida. So thanks, everybody. Take a question or two before I leave. Yes, sir.
Mark Plant with WGHC. Regarding parlaying off your invitation for people to invite them to the state of Florida, the mayor in Jacksonville has posted on a couple billboards, Inglewood, California, Ingalls Island, and Chicago, inviting people to our state. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think what you've seen over the last particularly years, I think you've seen an acceleration of people who've become disenchanted with a lot of bad policies in a lot of these parts of the country. I think a lot of it was COVID lockdowns and the irrationality of that. I think a lot of it has been crime and not having the wherewithal to stand by law enforcement. And then obviously the economic climate. We're a much more free economy. We don't have oppressive taxes. We have the lowest per capita tax burden in the country. We're proud of that. So I think there's a number of factors, but I do think that the last year has caused a lot of folks to say, you know what, we've got to go. I read something, and it rings true to me, but I haven't talked to people directly, but I read an article about how these financial firms, they're inundated with their employees saying, send me to Florida. I don't want to be in some of those cities anymore. So I think the state's got a lot to offer. At the same time, we've got a lot of good folks here. I mean, it's a free country. People can kind of do as they see fit. But I'm satisfied with a lot of the great stuff that's going on with some of our folks who have been here, and many of them who've been here for an awful long time, particularly in this part of the state. So it's a great mix, and we've got a lot of good momentum going forward, and we want to keep it that way. I mean, we've been able to lead on a lot of different things, and I think people have noticed that, and we're proud of that. Well, look, I think when you're talking about doing like infrastructure, obviously someone's going to be contracted to do this, so there is some type of effect on the local economy. But I think the main thing is as you understand the needs of different areas, and even this with the smaller cities, and I'm telling you, people see this. There's going to be people that are going to come. This city will grow. So all this stuff is happening, and so just having that solid foundation of infrastructure, I think, is really, really important. It can help facilitate jobs. I mean, obviously, we do this in a number of different parts of the state. For example, we've done a lot in the Space Coast of Florida, and you've seen with the private investments that go in, that is ready, that the people have wanted to do that, but having some of the things with the airport, with some of those other things, really make it so that people have what they need. So I don't think it's the type of thing where you can say, hey, if you do an infrastructure project here, it's definitely going to guarantee that these jobs come. But I do think that tending to that and understanding that that's an important foundation, does help you be able to have a strong economy going forward. We're also when we looked at, this was a couple months ago, I think we made the decision about not doing the enhanced unemployment because we had 500,000 job openings in Florida almost, and people were desperate. I can tell you, employers have said since we made that change, there's some that said they had more applications in like 3 weeks than they had in the previous 3 months because we're basically saying, okay, the jobs are there, let's get people into those jobs. And so I think that's been good, and I think the states that have done that are going to lead with filling some of our positions, and I think the states that didn't do that are going to continue to have a little bit more of the stagnation. So all in all, when I would go around the state, any corner of the state, people would tell me that about not being able to find enough employees. And so we're addressing that, and I think we're getting in a better spot. But just think, that's a much better problem to have than to have the opposite problem where there's no jobs available for anybody. And that's what, when COVID first hit and everything started to stop, that was really what a lot of people feared, that this would be a really deep, maybe a deep recession or maybe even a depression type thing where we'd have chronically high unemployment for months and months and maybe even years. And I think, at least in Florida, the opposite has happened. We've been below the national average in unemployment since last summer, and we're going to continue, I think, to trend in a good direction for private sector job growth. So fundamentals are good. I do worry about some of the macro trends where we see with inflation. If you look in the economy, and I think that's driven more by federal policies, but that does pinch folks. The gas prices, how much gasoline has gone up, that definitely pinches a lot of folks. So we're concerned about that. We feel like what we're doing in Florida is effective, and we think we've got a good foundation. But some of those trends, I think, are trends that need to be looked at, and hopefully on the federal level there'll be a more appropriate response so that we don't have too much inflation. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll be back soon. It's not something that just goes on continuously. They have it certain.
All right, so there you heard from the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, earlier today, speaking in Florida about a number of different topics. He commented there on the situation in Cuba. He also commented on the ongoing recovery efforts now out of Surfside, Florida, on the condo collapse there. 94 confirmed fatalities into the third week since it happened. Also talking about police, budgets, the economy as well. So wanted to just show you those remarks from earlier. We're going to take a quick 2-minute commercial break. When we come back, though, we're going to hear from some law enforcement leaders speaking outside the White House earlier today. They include Mayor Muriel Bowser of D.C., the soon-to-be, most likely to be next mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, also the Chicago police superintendent as well. We'll have all of that and more in 2 minutes. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you then. welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us on your Monday night. We now want to go out to some remarks made outside of the White House today by Eric Adams. He is the New York City mayoral hopeful. He just won the Democratic primary. He met with President Biden today. They found plenty of common ground as they met at the White House for a strategy session on how to stem a nationwide surge in shootings. You'll remember Eric Adams was a 20-year veteran of the NYPD. He's currently the Brooklyn Borough president. Let's hear what he and President Biden spoke about earlier today.
Right now, oftentimes you think about policing, that there's a conflict between those who wear the uniform, these amazing innovators around violence, the diversity, having a woman that heads the police department, as I see, is important. The meeting before the meeting was extremely productive. We had a great conversation, and the information sharing must be between these great men and women who are behind me. The question is, as we mentioned in the meeting today, we spent too much time looking at the role the police play. And as a former police officer, as a former, as you say, Republican, as a current Democrat, as a former person who was arrested and beat by police officers, I'm so many formers, I'm trying to figure out the current. One thing I'm clear about, the prerequisite to prosperity is public safety and justice. And if we don't have them both together, it doesn't matter how many police officers you put on the streets. We can't continue to respond to symptoms. It's time to respond to the underlying causes of violence in our city. This president is making it clear he's going to redefine the ecosystem of public safety, and that includes identifying the role of police, schools, families, resources, employment. This is where we need to go as a country. And I have to take my hat off to this president. Why did it take so long before we heard the gunshots that families were listening and hearing every night? Other communities were waking up to alarm clocks. Communities of black, brown, and poor people were waking up to gunshots. And this president said, this is not the America we're going to live in. And that is why I'm here. And I'm so proud to have been part of this meeting. And I'm proud of these men and women who are here today, because this is representative of what makes us great as a country.
Tomorrow, the president, I have a question for you for tomorrow. The president will be speaking in Philadelphia on voting rights, and he says that he'll be coming from the perspective of morals. Do you believe on policing that it is a moral or more so a legislative issue?
Combination. I believe that change is about those who agitate, such as the marches, negotiate, and legislate. And the real legislative response should be to the moral response. We've abandoned black and brown and poor communities in this country. We responded immediately when we saw those shootings with assault rifles that hit our college campuses and suburban counties, and it was the right thing to do. But the problem in America is the handgun. Yet the demographics of the victims are black, brown, and poor. We have ignored it for far too long. And we continue to have institutions in place and practices that feed crime in our country. How do we have a prison system where 30% of the people, the inmates, are dyslexic? That means the real crime didn't take place only on the streets. It took place in the Department of Education across America that refuses to identify how we feed crime. And so I think it's a moral and a legislative response to this, and we have a president that understands the moral responsibility.
Are you going to hire more cops, though, as you stay in New York, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what you told President Biden about New York specifically. What did you make any requests or demands or? Yes.
I'm here representing the great city of New York, and I'm clear on that. I'm not representing the country. I came here as the Brooklyn Borough president, which can be considered the third largest city in America. I think that my request of the president was, number one, to make sure that we use the money that is being allocated to deal with underlying causes, because we must have a plan that's prevention and intervention. Prevention consists of some of the long-term things I'm talking about, dyslexia screening, doulas, making sure we have job employment, which he's doing in his plan, and then intervention. We need to put in place real plans in New York City to go after the gun violence. We had a 13-year-old child that was assassinated in the Bronx, a 10-year-old child that was shot in Rockaway. These parents and families are looking for real relief right now, and I think there's some things we can do with the dollars that the president has allocated to make sure we get to those long-term plans. And does it mean, do we need to hire more police officers that are being asked over and over again? No, it means using the dollars correctly. And if that means putting more police in our subway system, let's do that. If that means putting more police officers out of their vehicles and walk the streets and have greater community engagement, let's do that. That means do whatever needs to be done to make the people of New York City safe.
Police chiefs, any of the police chiefs, how do you guys marry the crime prevention initiative by the president as well as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act?
Well, I'm Chief Davis from the city of Memphis, and I come from a city that is experiencing gun violence disproportionately in black and brown communities. There has to be a correlation between the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and also the work and the plan and the strategic plan that this president is pushing forward. We have to find balance. We can't continue to arrest crime away. We need to get guns off the street, hold people accountable, and ensure that our communities get the kind of protection that they need. Right now, black and brown communities are being terrorized from gun violence. We need to ensure that we give people an opportunity to stay out of the criminal justice system, but those individuals who continue to commit violent crime, they need to be dealt with by the criminal justice system. So we have to have balance.
Superintendent Brown, Lynn Sweet from the Chicago Sun-Times.
Yes.
Did you get any sense in the meeting about when the strike force will arrive in Chicago and what exactly is the makeup of it, what it's going to do? Will it arrive sooner than a month?
So one of the things we talked about, and I'm David Brown, Superintendent of Police, Chicago Police Department, one of the things we discussed was this sense of urgency around violence, the things we can do in the near term now, the strike force being one of the things we can start doing now. We haven't waited for that collaboration with the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms inside Chicago and other parts of the country. We've started putting together these plans. Likely we'll be rolling out something in the coming days so that we can start the investigative process both on tracing guns, but focused on gun trafficking. That's the impact. Making consequences happen in the federal courts. We did talk about the whole of government approach, the ecosystem of public safety that also includes street outreach, violence interruption, but we really focused on near-term making serious consequences a thing that happens in our cities with gun trafficking. Those who create violence in our cities that's happening right now. There was a sense of urgency both from the president and his administration. Both the Attorney General Garland was talking about a sense of urgency. What can we do now, adding resources now to have an impact on violence in our cities?
Because Garland is from the area, grew up in Lincolnwood, did he say anything to you that showed he knew the very areas that are troublesome in Chicago? And
yes, Attorney General Garland and I had a conversation before the meeting started. We had some commitments from him to help out with Chicago, and he offered whatever we needed from DOJ, we would get those resources. It includes task force officers. It includes additional prosecutions. It includes fast-tracking investigations on conspiracy cases. These are the people that drive violence in our cities. And so there was a significant commitment. It wasn't just a bland, great thing that you didn't, it was very substantive.
So is this to redeploy people who are on the ground already or to send in extra people?
It's both. It's deploying more resources as well as a hyper-focus on people who drive violence in our cities.
So is this a one-on-one pull-aside you had with Garland?
Yes, this was prior to the meeting. He and I talked and we discussed it during the meeting, and we'll have significant follow-up following the meeting.
Okay, so you, Mr. Adams talked about a pre-meeting. Who was at the pre-meeting? was there?
We all of us was at the pre-meeting,
Okay,
so we
who
all had
did
just
you
kind of
meet with?
informal conversations with amongst the group,
just
everyone in the
among you
group.
all.
Yeah, and I think others want to ask
What?
questions. You've done like 5 in a row.
During the meeting with President Biden, did he express a concern about gun violence and crime being worse in the weeks to come?
He expressed a concern regarding a sense of urgency to do something now, and not just to discuss the problem, but define solutions that we all could bring to the table that we could do almost immediately. And one of the things was a strike force, but additional resources from DOJ, from the Attorney General's office was discussed, a real commitment to follow up after today's meeting with significant things we all can do now. We did talk about long-term impacts, things that happen that speaks to the root causes of violent crime, but we had significant discussions around what we can do now. I want to just give some time to this gentleman who is part of the ecosystem of criminal justice that impacts the things that calm down the community, that creates peace treaties in the community with people who will commit crime. Please.
Yes, sir. I know that traditionally we say, traditionally you say public safety and people say police. And as my colleague said, that, there's an ecosystem of public safety that we actually have to fund. For far too long, we've invested heavily in law enforcement as a single, kind of ubiquitous point of safety, in our community, and we haven't invested in community-based solutions. So I represent an agency, the Community-Based Public Safety Collective, that is agencies who have been for close to 30 years doing community-based public safety initiatives like Cure Violence, like Advance Peace, like the National Network of Safe Communities, who have evidence-based results as well as community support in terms of their complementary strategy to reduce violence and crime in urban cities across the country. So the CBI initiative is unprecedented because we've seen violence spike, during the summertime in urban communities for close to 30 years. And so this president, this administration is launching an immediate, strategy to address violence on the ground now. The strategic partnership with community-based violence intervention, philanthropy, law enforcement to address immediate violence, as well as lay the foundation for a longer-term strategy. Someone talked about the George Floyd Act or the Break and Cycle of Violence Act. Those are also really important initiatives that put more dollars and resources into relationship-based strategies on the ground. Because again, we can't have just we can't have public safety without the public.
Give us
initially.
an example of what that looks like. What are you doing currently, like an actual example?
Yes.
I know the president said he's interested in getting, I'm paraphrasing, pay into people's pockets instead of them pulling pistols out.
That's
Are
right.
you talking, is what your work is in line with what he was saying and describe something specifically so that our listeners and viewers will know what to go looking for?
That's right. So the Newark Community Street Team is the agency that I currently run in the city of Newark. It is a complementary strategy to public safety. We employ about 50 residents from the neighborhood. 100% of our staff are residents of the communities in which they live in. And we train them in conflict resolution, mediation, de-escalation strategies, trauma-informed approaches, and we deploy them at 3 key intersections. We have a high-risk intervention team that intervenes in individual and group conflicts, both historical and present. We have a team that does safe passage around our schools. We did a study with the health department and discovered that most of the violence that's happening in the neighborhood is happening in and around schools. Things happen on the campus during the week and spill into the community on the weekend and vice versa, right? So our high-risk interventionists, non-traditional leaders, ex-gang members, ex-convicts, people who have changed their lives for the positive, act as a deterrent at these schools and prevent violence, right? We also have victims advocates. It's interesting that black and brown folks in many of these communities that experience high levels of violence don't identify as victims. Victims have a negative connotation to it. So we call ourselves survivors, right? And the survivor says that someone has had an experience, they're engaged in their respective healing journey, and conceivably they don't want it to happen to others, right? And so this kind of coordinated services strategy amongst residents and community. We also launched the city's first hospital-based violence intervention program, right? So when people are harmed, they go to the hospital, we meet them bedside, we consent them into the program. Our high-risk interventionist meets the community health worker to, negotiate a safety plan. Because there's a pretty high threshold in terms of arrest and prosecution, and law enforcement is not always able to make an arrest. So you need residents who are reputable, credible messengers who are trained on the ground, who can mediate some of these conflicts to a peaceful outcome, while law enforcement gathers the intelligence and the information that they need to make an arrest. And now also we know that the arrest doesn't always end the problem, right? there's a direct correlation between what happens in jail and what happens in the community. So there's a lot of maintenance work that goes into mediation and conflict resolution. It's not just a one-time thing and you get together and it's over, right? And so this is a career path for many folks in our community. It's a workforce development opportunity, you know, because people get paid like doing this work. It's extremely dangerous work. You know, we leverage our relationship capital in neighborhoods in order to prevent, you know, violence from happening. And we work closely with law enforcement. We don't share intelligence with law enforcement because it impacts our credibility and potentially the lives of the individuals who are actually mediating the conflict in the field. But we have a professional understanding, right? We're working on a parallel path around safety and community. We're all headed towards the same mountaintop. And so we respect each other's work in the field. This coordinated strategy, at least in a city like Newark, we've had 5 consecutive years in a row of decrease of homicide and overall violence. In the South Ward, where violence was concentrated for almost 50 consecutive years, we've had a negative 48% reduction in homicide in these communities. This is because you have a coordinated strategy, you know, with municipal services, with law enforcement, with community-based organization, with health, with schools, all working together to present a comprehensive ecosystem of safety in communities. And this is the thing that we have to invest in and support.
If I could just add 3, I just wanted to add 3. You asked about dollars in pockets and what the American Rescue dollars will allow us to do in D.C. are many things. We have a $59 million investment that's in front of our council now. I'll just highlight a couple. One is we're actually identify green jobs that these dollars will create at our Department of Public Works. 100 new positions that all of our teams that are working to prevent crime will now be able to connect those individuals looking for a different path to those jobs. We're also going to pilot an initiative for returning citizens. Our DC residents coming home from incarceration with cash assistance. And the last one that I will highlight is a program for housing. If you hear from a lot of people who are looking for a different path, housing is a huge barrier. And sometimes we can make neighborhoods safer if we're able to provide housing in a different neighborhood for a family, an entire family, or someone who is involved in crime.
Mayor Bowser, what about police officers this building and also from around the Capitol in recent weeks? Are you now more able to focus on street violence in D.C. without worrying about the political violence?
We focus on it all. That's our job. Our Metropolitan Police Department supports our federal law enforcement partners, Secret Service here, United States Capitol Police at the Capitol, and First Amendment demonstrations when they happen in Washington. So that's our job, to focus on everything. It is important, however, that the federal government have a strategy to protect its assets that doesn't involve so much human labor. And so the intelligence focus, looking at how to harden their environment without tall fences is something that we have always called for. And it's just another reminder to everybody listening that D.C. is open and come and visit us.
Immunity for police officers that are going to be sued. There is an argument that there should be immunity for police officers who are threatened to be sued. What is your thought on that and the broader scale?
Certainly. Sure. Certainly, we have been very focused on a full range of reforms to our criminal justice system, and for our police over the last 20 years, what we've been focused on is professionalizing and training and holding our police officers accountable, and that will continue to be our strategy.
I realize today's meeting might have focused on operational developments, but is there a sense of urgency here politically to also send a message that local Democratic leaders, are supportive of expanding police forces, especially in the face of criticism from Republicans and other challengers that are saying that are seeking to link the defund the police label to Democrats?
Well, I think, I can speak for Washington, D.C. and myself, and my commitment to D.C. residents is to always put in front of them and our council what we need. What we need in terms of new officers. That's why my budget includes 100 new officers, 200 new police cadets. And next year, I actually think we'll be able to do a little bit more. But it also includes violence prevention efforts to tune of $59 million. And so I think from a city like ours, people care about safety, they care about fair policing and justice, and they care that the police and the community work together. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys.
All right, so there you heard from a number of elected officials, law enforcement officials around the country. That was D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. She met at the White House. Remember, President Biden hosted this roundtable today to try to get to the bottom of why gun violence is surging across America, especially in big cities like Washington, D.C., like New York City. Eric Adams, we heard from him there. You also saw the superintendent of police in Chicago, David Brown, was there as well. And they were being hosted by President Biden earlier today at the White House. We're going to take just a quick 2-minute commercial break. When we come back, we have news out of the Pentagon and Afghanistan. The top U.S. commander in Afghanistan officially handing over his command this morning in Kabul as the war comes to an end after 20 years. We'll have that and more in 2 minutes. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft, and thank you for being with us and for choosing Live Now as your go-to source for live, raw, and unfiltered feeds and events from around the country and around the world on the biggest stories and the top headlines of the day. We have some really great skyline live shots at the moment from cities around the country. Let's go to one of them right there. That's a live look at Miami, Florida at the moment, and lots of news happening there, especially with the Cuban expat community, as anti-government demonstrations have roiled Havana over the weekend and today. And we'll be covering that story throughout the week here. We also have another live look at the moment. This is in New Orleans, Louisiana at this hour. Some political news, some sad political news out of the state of Louisiana today. Former Louisiana Governor Edwin Edwards dying today at the age of 93. We'll have more on his life a little bit later. And this really great shot here, too. This is in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. It's a little after 11:30 there on the East Coast. You can kind of make out the steps, the Rocky Steps, the famous Rocky Steps of the Philadelphia Art Museum there in the distance. Anyway, we're going to leave the United States for a moment because I want to bring you some other news. The top U.S. commander in Afghanistan officially hands over his command today. General Austin Miller relinquishing his command there earlier today at a military ceremony in Kabul as the U.S. prepares to withdraw troops and end the 20-year war. You can see there the ceremony that took place a little earlier today. Miller has served as top commander since 2018. The troop withdrawal and change in command comes as Taliban insurgents gain territory across Afghanistan. Marine General Frank McKenzie will now take over and operate from Central Command headquarters in Florida. Anyway, let's hear from the general himself, Austin Miller, today, speaking after he relinquished his command in Kabul.
The world recognizes that Afghanistan cannot be a safe haven for terrorism. The world recognizes we cannot fail. I know this has been a long fight, and it has been generational. For us, for the Afghan people. I understand the reason we're fighting, and I know why we're here. And I know terrorists seek safe haven to export murder and attack the innocent and threaten everybody's way of life. I look forward to getting started, and I'm ready to get reacquainted with our Afghan partners. It'll be my distinct honor to work with the Afghan government and the Afghan people.
He led the charge to bring all 6 of the Afghan.
All right, and that was from General Austin Miller's ceremony today, where he relinquished command of the the U.S. forces in Afghanistan as the troops withdraw. The withdrawal now more than 90% complete there. President Biden made extensive remarks about the situation last week from the White House, where he said that basically Afghanistan is on its own. They'll support Afghanistan in any way they can going forward, but we were never there to nation build. Those were his words, this coming 20 years after the U.S. invaded the country and set up shop there. So right now we do want to go to Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby. He talked about a number of different topics today, this on the docket as well, the U.S. troop withdrawal. Remember, some 600 troops will remain there. That's to shore up the diplomatic missions in the country, also the Kabul airport as well. But still, we're getting news day by day that the Taliban is encroaching, especially in the north. They're taking over several districts there, and so it remains to be seen. And we'll hear from Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby about all of this and more.
To go through at the top, so please bear with me. I think earlier today, there was a transition of authority ceremony held at Resolute Support Headquarters in Kabul, Afghanistan, marking the transition of command authorities from General Scott Miller to the commander of U.S. Central Command, General Frank McKenzie. As the Secretary approved earlier this month, and as we outlined to you on July 2nd, General McKenzie will now lead the U.S. mission in Afghanistan, and that's focused on 4 things. 1, protecting our diplomatic presence in country. 2, enabling the safe operation of Hamid Karzai International Airport. 3, continuing to provide appropriate advice and assistance to the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. And 4, supporting our counterterrorism efforts. As you heard from Secretary Austin just hours ago, before his meeting with the UK Secretary of State for Defense, Ben Wallace, this transfer of authority is only the next milestone in an ongoing drawdown process. The withdrawal remains on track to be complete by the end of August, and General McKenzie retains all existing authorities surrounding the conduct of ongoing counterterrorism operations needed to protect our homeland from any threats that may emanate out of Afghanistan. As General McKenzie said to those that were in Kabul for the ceremony, and I'm quoting him now, "This ceremony marks an important milestone in and transition of our involvement in Afghanistan. What it does not signify is an end of our commitment to our Afghan partners." Now, as he said, that we'll be able to support counterterrorism efforts and our Afghan partners from places outside of the country indicates a change in posture, but not a change in our resolve to support our partners. Now, both Secretary Austin and General McKenzie have expressed their thanks to General Miller. You may have caught the Secretary's comments just an hour or so ago to that regard, to thank General Miller and his team for their diligent execution of the retrograde of millions of tons of equipment and thousands of personnel, all conducted with great efficiency and without a single casualty. And I think that's historic. When you think about this kind of withdrawal, which is ongoing, but when you think about what they've accomplished in a short period of time, and no one's gotten hurt, and we had to assume it would be a contested environment, we haven't done something like this. So it truly was historic. Now, following today's events, General Miller departed Afghanistan. He's on his way back to the United States. We'll have more to talk about that in the coming days. Moving on, here in Washington, I think I already alluded to it in my comments about Afghanistan. The Secretary did welcome and host the Secretary of State for Defense of the United Kingdom, Ben Wallace. And here at the Pentagon today, they are now visiting Arlington Cemetery, where the Secretary of State for Defense will lay a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. We'll put out a readout later today of the meeting and what they discussed. Now, shifting gears to some ongoing exercises. In the European Command Theater, the Ukrainian-U.S. co-hosted exercise Sea Breeze concluded over the weekend. 31 ships, 40 aircraft, and Navy and Marine Corps personnel conducted 175 events throughout the Black Sea to include air, surface, and subsurface warfare drills to build upon interoperability in the Black Sea region. The destroyer USS Ross and other U.S. Navy Sixth Fleet forces are now heading to Bulgaria to kick off the annual Bulgarian-led exercise Breeze. Our transition to the next exercise demonstrates our continued support to all of our Black Sea allies and partners and shows our commitment to building a community dedicated to strengthening stability and security in the region. Also in Bulgaria, exercise Thracian Star 21 kicked off today. This exercise builds upon our ability to integrate with NATO allies from Bulgaria, Greece, and Romania to train for supporting regional security during peacetime, contingencies, and crises. As part of the exercise this week, F-16s and airmen from Aviano Air Base, Italy, will conduct training alongside NATO forces to enhance our ability to provide a credible fighting force. Now, in the Indo-Pacific area, yesterday marked the first day of U.S. Army Pacific's Forager 21, which is the primary training exercise in support of Defender Pacific 21. Forager 21 is designed to test and refine the theater Army ability to deploy land forces to the Pacific, execute command and control, and effectively conduct multi-domain operations throughout Oceania from July 11th to August 6th, 2021. Approximately 4,000 U.S. personnel are directly participating in Forager 21. This exercise will consist of several major events, to include an 82nd Airborne Operation, a bilateral airborne operation with the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force and 1st Special Forces Group, an AH-64 helicopter live-fire exercise, multi-domain operations including movements of Strykers, Avengers, and high-mobility artillery rocket systems, and modernization efforts in the space and cyber domains. Finally, NORAD and U.S. NORTHCOM, in partnership with all 11 combatant commands, are leading the latest in a series of Global Information Dominance Experience, or GIDE, G-I-D-E. Guide 3 began July 8th, and it will continue through the 15th of this month. The experiment is taking place globally through virtual events, but will also involve some live fly events in northern Michigan. The experiment embodies a fundamental change in how we use information and data to increase decision space, as well as a concerted effort to create global integration. The goal is to shift the department away from today's regionally focused plans, strategies, force management, and force design paradigms, and budgetary and acquisition processes. GUIDE focuses on rapidly developing the capabilities required to increase deterrence options in competition and crises through a data-centric, software-based approach. It's very much part and parcel of what you heard the Secretary talk about a few months ago about integrated deterrence for the next century. GUIDE events will combine people and technology to innovate and accelerate system development for domain awareness, information dominance, decisional superiority, and global integration. Lastly, I know I said finally on that, but lastly, I want to note that, and I know you all are aware, that later this afternoon there'll be a memorial service for Tajinder Singh, formerly of India America Today, over in downtown. And again, I just want to use this opportunity to express our condolences on behalf of everybody at the department to him, to his family, to his loved ones, to his colleagues, and actually to all of you who I know felt very deeply about him and his professionalism. We mourn with you, and we are certainly missing him here in the briefing room today. And I know it'll be a very touching and fitting event that celebrates an incredible career in journalism. Bob?
Thanks, John. Thanks for those final words about Mr. Singh. I do have two questions for you related to the transfer of authority from General Miller to General McKenzie. First one is, do General McKenzie's authorities to conduct airstrikes against the Taliban end on August 31st? And the second question is, when you mentioned that the airport security will be one of the 4 missions or purposes, what exactly, have you worked out what exactly U.S. troops would do at the airport? Will they be operating some sort of defensive weapon systems, or what will they be doing?
On your first question about authorities, what I can tell you is, as I said in my opening statement, that General McKenzie has all those authorities now, as did General Miller. So he possesses them now. I'm not going to speculate about timing on that, but what I can tell you is that certainly throughout the remainder of the summer, through the end of August, General McKenzie has those authorities. I won't go beyond that in terms of schedule or speculating about what it would look like going forward. On the airport, I think you know, Bob, we already have some, and have had for quite some time, some troops dedicated to security at the airport. There's an aviation support element there. There are some defensive capabilities. And I would expect that, without getting into details, to some degree and in some way, that support will continue through the drawdown. Now, what things look like after that, and after we've continued to flesh out all the details with Turkey, who has agreed to lead this security effort, we'll see. But what that looks like going forward after the drawdown. But through the drawdown, yes, we will have requisite capabilities there at the airport to assist in the security.
So it's not clear that they would continue after August 3rd.
I don't want to get ahead of a decision-making process that's not complete. We are still in discussions with the Turks about what security at the airport is going to look like. We're grateful for their willingness to lead this effort. You heard President Erdogan talk about that last week. We're still hammering out, as President Erdogan said, we're still hammering out the scope of what that is. And when we get that all solidified, we'll be able to talk in more detail. But I don't want to speculate about a specific future presence at the airport for American forces just yet.
Can I follow up on the airport
Yeah,
thing?
sure.
So I understand there's some kind of an agreement on a framework for the providing security for the airport by the Turkish side, but there's some sticking points is still under discussion. Are you able to highlight which issues are still being discussed with the Turkish side?
I don't. First of all, I would take issue with the description of sticking points. We've had some productive discussions with the Turks. We've been reading some of those calls out to you that the Secretary has had himself with his counterpart. I don't believe I'd describe them as sticking points, but there are some modalities and some requirements that we're still working out with the Turks. And again, I don't think it would be useful for me to, publicly conduct a negotiation here at the podium. We're still talking with them, and when we have it more solidified, we'll be able to talk about it.
But is the U.S. open to the idea that it might have to provide some troops for the purpose of securing the airport in the future in Kabul?
We are working out what the future security requirements are going to be at the airport. I'm not going to speculate right now what that's going to look like. As I mentioned to Bob, of course, we have some responsibilities there, have had for a long time. They're still in place. What it's going to look like when the drawdown is over, I think we'll have to get to later. The only thing I'd add is that the president has made it very clear we're going to maintain a diplomatic presence in Kabul. We know that in order to do that, you have to have adequate security at the airport. So we are very aware of the need for adequate security at the airport so as to protect our diplomats and the work that they need to do in Afghanistan. I think I'll leave it at that. JJ Green, I think you're on the phone.
Yes, John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
We spoke some time ago about the over-the-horizon capability or capacity that the U.S. was working on, and you've spoken about it a couple times since then at the podium. Thanks for taking this question, but I wanted to ask you again, are there any more details about what that over-the-horizon capability would look like if it were necessary to utilize?
There is already an over-the-horizon capability, and we can talk about what that looks like. We have bases and facilities that we can use in the Middle East region, and we have a carrier strike group in the region, and that is being utilized. We already have existing over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities. Now, would we like to be able to close down time and space and to make it faster and more efficient? Absolutely. And so we are talking about and discussing with countries in the region about the possibilities of being able to use facilities and infrastructure that is closer to Afghanistan. I don't have any progress specifically to report out today on that, but it's something that we're actively discussing in concert with our State Department colleagues. But again, we have now a robust over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability, and we're using it.
Just to follow up on that.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Robust counterterrorism capability, you have the ability to launch airstrikes. Why aren't you using them as the Taliban continues to take more territory in Afghanistan?
Lucas, I thought we talked about this one last week. I'll try again. The mission right now in Afghanistan, and I went through the 4 missions, is to continue the drawdown. General McKenzie now has the authorities to assist the Afghan National Security Forces where and when he finds it feasible to do so. But he has those authorities. And as I also have said, the Afghans themselves have strike capability. Lucas, they have a good Air Force, a solid Air Force. An Air Force, by the way, that we're adding to and trying to improve the capability of. We're going to be giving them another 37 Black Hawk helicopters. That's more than they have right now. So in effect, doubling their attack helicopter capability. We're purchasing for them 3 more Super Tucano strike aircraft, fixed-wing strike aircraft. And we've agreed to help refurbish a good part of their fleet of Mi-17 helicopters. They have a robust Air Force. The Taliban does not. And they can use that Air Force in a strike capacity in support of their troops on the ground. As we have said for quite some time now, I think whatever the outcomes are 6 to 8 months from now, whatever it is, we're going to be able to look back and we're going to be able to see that leadership, Afghan leadership, is really what made the difference, or really what caused the outcomes to occur. Afghan civilian leadership, political leadership, and Afghan military leadership. This is their country. This is their fight. These are their people. And the president has been very clear that it is now time for them to meet those responsibilities. Barbara.
I didn't actually hear an answer to Lucas's question either time, and I want to ask that and follow up.
Before you follow up, I'm not going to repeat the whole thing again, but as I said, General McKenzie has the authorities to assist the Afghans where he deems feasible.
The question, I believe, Lucas could correct me if I'm wrong, is the Taliban have continued with a very aggressive campaign of violence and intimidation. To the best of our knowledge, we have not seen coalition air forces in action against the Taliban. We're not asking you I'm not asking you what capacity the Afghans have. I'm asking you why, number one, have U.S. coalition forces not been brought into the action? What is it that you're waiting for? And then I have an airport question.
I never said that we haven't been brought into the action. I've never said that we haven't supported.
Any airstrikes?
There have been moments during the drawdown where we have supported the Afghans. Absolutely.
Can we get details on what the most recent airstrikes have been?
I think you can understand, Barbara, that given the situation that we're in, that we're not going to be detailing everything we're doing to support. But it would be wrong to report that there's been no support to Afghan forces in the field during this drawdown. And as I said to Bob's question, The general still has those authorities to use when he deems fit, when it is most feasible to do so.
Can you at least give us some context? The drawdown's gone on for several months. Was it in the early days? Can you roughly tell us the last time there was a coalition airstrike?
I will not. I will not do that because the drawdown is ongoing. And as I've said from the very beginning, we have to assume that this drawdown is going to be contested, so we're going to be careful about the kind of information we're putting out there. But it would be wrong to conclude, inaccurate to report, that we have not come to the assistance of the Afghan National Security Forces throughout this period of drawdown.
My other question is on the airport. You keep talking about future security requirements and the need to maintain security for the adequate security for the embassy and these future security requirements. So, and that you're continuing to discuss this with the Turks about what these future security requirements are. So by definition, does that mean that there is not currently adequate security at the airport because you are still having discussions about future security? And what is your assessment of the security situation at the airport?
It does not mean that.
How does it not mean that? Help me understand.
Because there is still the security at the airport has historically been a mission the Turks have contributed to under the Resolute Support umbrella. So they are there now, and they have agreed to stay there. There are, but as all forces draw down out of Afghanistan, there are going to have to be adjustments made to who else is helping the Turks and in what way that help is being rendered. That's the discussion that's happening right now, and I'm simply not prepared because it's not complete to detail that for you. The Secretary is comfortable that there's adequate security at the airport right now and is determined throughout the period of the drawdown to make sure that that security remains in place. Some of that security is being provided by the United States. What that's going to look like after the drawdown is over, we're just not there yet.
So what's your assessment of what the Taliban's goal is?
What's my assessment of?
What is the U.S. assessment, what is the Defense Department's assessment of the goal of the Taliban?
I'm going to make it a habit not to get inside the Taliban's headspace here, and I'm certainly not going to talk about intelligence assessments. It is clear from what they are doing that they have governance designs, certainly of a national scale. It is clear from what they are doing that they believe there is a military solution to the end of this conflict. We continue to believe that the most sustainable, the most responsible end and solution to this war is a political one through negotiated diplomacy, a negotiated settlement that is Afghan-led. Nothing has changed about our desire to see that be the outcome.
So you think they want to take over the country?
I said they clearly have governance designs of a national character because you can see it in the districts that they are trying to challenge and or have occupied. Tom.
Thanks, John. I have two questions. One is a few briefings ago you mentioned that there would possibly or most likely be some kind of ceremony recognizing the end of the mission in Afghanistan. Paraphrasing you slightly, but that was the response you gave to a question. I'm presuming, but please correct me, that today's ceremony is not what you're referring to, and if not, is that still part of the plan?
You're right. Today is not the end of the mission, and I don't believe that General McKenzie or Secretary Austin could have made that more clear. Not the end, just a milestone.
Yeah.
And obviously, the Secretary wants to be able to recognize the service and sacrifice of the more than 800,000 U.S. troops who have fought and served in Afghanistan. And there'll be an appropriate time for that. There'll be an appropriate place for that. And when we have something to announce, we certainly will.
I wanted to follow up on the Lucas Barbara questions, if I may, please.
Of course.
I think it was a response to Barbara that you didn't want to say from the podium the detail any kind of support, specific incidents of support that the U.S. and coalition troops have given.
That's right.
In part, and please correct me if I misstate what you said, in part because there's a concern of being attacked on the way out by the Taliban and others. You don't want to...
As I said, from the very beginning, we have to assume that at any time this drawdown can be contested by the Taliban. So far, we have had no casualties. Everybody has gotten out safely and efficiently, and we want to keep that as the case.
So your theory is that by telling us, like, say, this happened 3 weeks ago, we gave them support. I'm making that up, just to be clear. That would possibly jeopardize this delicate balance we have now, that there's been no casualties, no attacks.
I don't think I'd put it in your words. I would simply say that operational security is a prime concern, and we want to be very careful about the information we release right now.
But the information that Barbara asked, and Lucas and others, about support, if indeed the coalition forces have supported the Afghan troops at some point in the past against the Taliban, wouldn't the Taliban already know that? I mean, why can't you tell us about something that has happened, if indeed it happened, in support of the Afghan forces against the Taliban, who I would think knew what hit them already?
You're making a presumption that for some reason we're trying to keep information from the Taliban. What we're trying to do, no, Tom, wait, just let me finish, please. Okay. What we're trying to do is protect our options going forward to make sure that the rest of this drawdown can be safe and orderly. And so we are being, I'll just say it, we're being fairly miserly about the kind of operational information we're putting out there. I know that's an adjustment from how, over the last 20 years, we've talked about this war and our involvement in it. But this is a delicate time, Tom, a very delicate time. As you saw last week, Central Command said that we're, just over 90% done with the drawdown. That means that you have less capability and you have less resources at your disposal inside the country. So you want to be ultra careful about the kind of information that's getting out there, because the capabilities are now dwindling down, and we got to be careful. And we make no apologies for that. It's not about it's not about what the Taliban knows or doesn't know. It's about what we're putting out into the information space to make sure we preserve our options. So far, again, nobody's been hurt. We want to keep that going throughout the entirety of this drawdown process.
Thank you.
John, last week, White House press secretary said that this war has not been militarily won. Does the U.S. military agree with that assessment?
I think we've said all along, and I've said it just a few minutes ago, we don't believe there's going to be a military solution here. It's got to be done politically. That is not a new talking point. It's not a new fact. It's not a new conclusion. We want to see a political settlement to this conflict, to this war in Afghanistan. But as for the United States, the president has made it clear that our participation is going to transition now. We're going to bring our troops home, and we're going to transition to a new relationship with Afghan forces going forward.
So yeah, basically you are saying a different thing. Like, she says the war has not been militarily won. It means that
because we don't believe that it can be solved militarily.
Okay. And the other one, so Taliban is taking over the country, and then thousands of people are already running away from the country into Tajikistan, into Iran. Even some of them have arrived into Turkey. And then you guys just leave the whole base, the large background base, without even saying goodbye to Afghans. Can you convince the world that this is something other than defeat, other than failure?
This is a conflict that is going to be solved politically, and it's a responsibility that the Afghan people, the Afghan government, and Afghan forces now have to be responsible for. They'll have us helping and supporting them, but it's their responsibility. This isn't about a defeat. It's about a transition to a new relationship with Afghan forces. And the fighting doesn't have to continue. I mean, you talk about it with this sense of inevitability that, frankly, I don't think we share. That there has to be more fighting, that the Taliban will take over the country. None of that is inevitable. And as I said earlier to Lucas, I think when we look back 6-8 months from now, what we're going to see is the influence of leadership and how much political, military leadership out of Afghan leaders there was to not make that inevitable. And let me just one more time, because you brought up Bagram, to go back on this again. There was full coordination in the turnover of Bagram Air Base, contrary to what I've seen in some press reporting. Full coordination. Days before a walkthrough of the whole base, an aerial flyover of the whole base. A couple of days before, we hosted a couple of dozen Afghan engineers on the base to show them how to operate the electrical system and the water system. And I take issue with your characterization that we just walked out of Bagram without saying goodbye. First of all, it's not a goodbye. It was a turnover to them and their custodial responsibilities, and it was done in full coordination. Now, I can't stand up and say with certainty and assert to you that every soldier, every Afghan soldier at or near Bagram got the word that what was happening. But I can assert to you, because I've seen the documents, that, in fact, the turnover was done in a coordinated way with senior Afghan military and civilian leaders. There was no secret about it. Bagram was always going to be the last base turned over, and the process of getting it ready for turnover was weeks long and months planned.
Can you call it a victory then? 20 years war. Can you call the 20 years U.S. operation inside Afghanistan as a victory to United States military?
What I can tell you is that the United States military accomplished the mission for which it was sent to Afghanistan. That was to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for another attack on the homeland. And there hasn't been one since 9/11. And al-Qaeda, while present, is nowhere near the organization that it once was. I'm not saying that there aren't terrorist groups operating out of Afghanistan. There are. We've been fairly honest and open about that. But the threats that they pose to the homeland are radically reduced. As a matter of fact, what we said is the threats have actually moved elsewhere in the region and into Africa. And we need to be able to focus resources and strategy against that threat as it continues to metastasize. So I can't speak for every veteran, and I wouldn't begin to do that, because they're all entitled to their own opinions about their service and sacrifice over the last 20 years. But the mission for which the United States military was sent to Afghanistan was accomplished.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me get back to the phone. I've neglected that. Carla Babb.
Hey, John. I saw your. Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. My iPad died on me. One of the challenges of technology, so I just wanted to restart it. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I was just wondering, I heard your comments with Fox News Sunday, and I wanted you to talk about if there's a worry among officials at the Pentagon that, I know you said the Taliban victory is not inevitable, but is there a worry that the Taliban is wiping out and will continue to wipe out gains that the U.S. has fought for and died for alongside Afghans?
Carla, we are certainly concerned about the prospect that the social, economic, political progress that has been made in Afghanistan over the last 20 years could be harmed or put at peril by increasing Taliban advances. We're obviously concerned about that. We're not, thank you, we're not unmindful of the threats that are posed in that regard, which is why the president has made it clear we're going to maintain a diplomatic presence in Kabul. So that our diplomats can continue to support those kinds of programs and initiatives. It's also why we're going to continue to have a bilateral relationship with Afghan forces going forward. It won't be the same. We're not going to be on the ground with them, but we will still be with them. We will still be helping them financially, logistically, and in other ways. And that's why this is just a transition to a new relationship. It's not the end of the relationship.
And then one other follow-up, if I may, because I need to understand kind of where the buck stops. What you had mentioned earlier about the airstrikes, it seems to me, based on what you had said, that the U.S. is either not helping with the airstrikes, it's not feasible, according to General McKenzie, for the U.S. to get in and do some of these airstrikes, or the U.S. is helping with these airstrikes, but not making a significant difference as the Taliban continues to make these gains. So who is making these decisions on the airstrike? Who does the buck stop with? Is it General Miller, or was it General Miller until today? And now will it be General McKenzie? How involved is the Pentagon involved in these decisions, or how involved is the Pentagon with these decisions, I should say?
So first, on your list of three things that aren't happening, I take issue with all of them, Carla. I don't believe anybody has said any of those things. And as I said at the outset, General McKenzie now has the authorities that General Miller had, and the decision-making ability for how he wants to or can or is feasible to support Afghan forces in the field. Idris.
Hey, John, can you hear me? Hey, can you hear me, John?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear John?
I just wanted to pivot to Haiti really quick. The review that you guys are undertaking on the request from the Haitian government, do you know when it'll be complete? Are we talking days or weeks? And I just wanted to make sure I understand the NSC statement. It sort of had a list of folks who went to Haiti. It didn't have any DOD officials, so I just want to make sure no one from DOD was part of that delegation that went to Haiti and returned today, right?
Nobody from DOD was in that party that went down to Haiti. It was largely Department of Homeland Security and FBI, and it was to help the Haitians as they continue to investigate this terrible crime. And as for the requests, we are aware of it here at the Pentagon. We are reviewing it. We're going to do so carefully and make sure that we completely understand it. And we'll be discussing it inside the interagency, but I have no decisions and certainly no timeline to provide you today. We're aware of it. We're reviewing it just like we would review any request for U.S. Military assistance. And if and when there is a decision to be able to speak to you about that, we'll certainly do it. In the room anymore? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, John. I want to ask you about China's nuclear capabilities. Earlier this month, several U.S.
So at the moment, we want to step away from that. We're going to go to just a quick 2-minute commercial break. But there you heard the Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby take a number of questions from reporters there at the Pentagon about a whole host of topics, most notably including the Afghanistan withdrawal. U.S. troops are now more than 90% out of the country. We've left Bagram Airfield as well after being there for 20 years. The general in command relinquished that command earlier today, Scott Miller, and so all things seem to be going according to plan ahead of President Biden's targeted deadline of September 11th of this year. That is obviously the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. Anyway, I'm Andrew Kraft. Thank you for being with us here on Live Now. We're going to take just a quick 2-minute commercial break. When we come back, news out of Texas and Washington, those Texas state Democrats flying to the nation's capital to forestall a special legislative session in Austin. We'll have that and more in 2 minutes. All right, welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. That is a live look at the moment at San Francisco in the Bay Area. It's just almost 9:20 p.m. here on the West Coast, 12:20 in the morning on the East Coast. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us. We want to go out to one of the biggest stories we've been following today. This has to do with state politics in Texas. A special session of the legislature was called up in Austin by Governor Greg Abbott. Well, Texas Democrats didn't want to be there, and therefore they will not make quorum in order to vote on this controversial package of election reform bills. The Democrats say it's voter suppression, and they left the state completely. They flew to Washington, D.C. today for the duration of the special session, and so it looks like efforts to even debate and talk about what's known as Senate Bill 7, that election reform package, will not happen. And so on the tarmac today at Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., some of the leaders of this group of Texas state Democrats spoke to the press and gave their reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. Let's listen in.
The voters of Texas. And they disrespect the members, the diverse members who represent those communities all across the state of Texas, from South Texas to West Texas to North Texas to East Texas. And that's why we are here. We are determined to kill this bill in this special session, which will end on August the 7th. And we will stay out until then in order to do that. We are going to use that time to plead with our friends and our colleagues and our leaders in the Congress that the time is now. There is no more time. You must pass strong federal voter protection legislation, and you must do it now. You must do it before the August recess. Our democracy is at stake. That's what's on the line. That is why we are here. And now it's my privilege to introduce someone who is a hero to everyone right here, the Dean of the Texas House of Representatives Democratic Caucus, Ms. Sophronia Thompson from Houston.
Hi. I'm a member of that committee that sat through that marathon hearing, some 23 hours and 35 minutes. And all of my constituents' desires were denied. Let me tell you why I left. I left because I am tired of sitting as a hostage in a Texas House of Representatives while Republicans strip away the rights of my constituents to vote. We have fought too long and too hard in this country to get away from having to count beans in a bag, having to count bubbles in a soap bar. And we have achieved the full right to vote in this country. And when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill in 1965, I thought that would put to rest forever anyone's desire to strip away the rights for anyone to vote. When I look at the fact that we go to Iraq to fight a war and give those persons the right to vote over there, and yet in our own homeland we have citizens who are a part of this country, the fabric of this country, we want to strip away their rights. And that is the reason why that we are refusing to be allowed to remain Republican hostages in the Texas House of Representatives. Please allow me to introduce my colleague, Trey Martinez Fisher from Bexar County.
Thank you, Ms. C. Hey. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I am Trey Martinez Fisher from San Antonio, Texas. Being around Chairwoman Thompson, you learn something every day. As a member of the committee, she heard a lot and saw a lot, and we can talk about the proposal that we walked away from to defend democracy. Well, Ms. Thompson reminded me of a time when you could show up to vote and you went into a booth, you can close a curtain, and you could vote in privacy.
Yes.
Under the provisions of this bill, you could literally have a voter walk through a polling place, be greeted by the Proud Boys, and they can stand over your shoulder and watch you vote close enough to listen if you were to whisper something to yourself, or close enough to see how you were casting your votes. That's the environment we're talking about. There is nothing special about this special session. This is a suppression session. This is a session to suppress our voting rights. And every man and woman standing here and those Democrats that we know that are safe and secure in other states, we're not going to put up with that. Democracy is on the line. The eyes of the nation are on Texas. And we came here a few weeks ago with about 20 men and women to make our case to the U.S. Senate. This time we brought a little reinforcements. We have courage, conviction, and a little bit of defiance. And we're here today to rally the nation, and we hope that the U.S. Senate will hear us. And we hope that they will hear us and they will act to pass the For the People Act before the August 6th recess. We can see what's happening in this country. We know Leader Schumer has laid out a very ambitious agenda before the August 6th recess, and we want voting rights to be on that agenda. We want to vote up or down. We want to know who you are. And are you with us? We will be on the Hill this week. We are going to be working hard. This is a working trip. Everybody here is committed to doing it. And before this gets lost in the discussion, you need to understand we are citizen lawmakers. We don't get professional salaries. We're husbands. We're wives. We're single parents. We have businesses, or we're somebody's employee. Understand the amount of emotion that is going on with us, not just on this politics, not just on the governor incidentally referring to us as, I guess, animal or property to say that he will corral us and he will cabin us in the Capitol to get this agenda. Understand the emotion of everybody up here and what we're leaving on the table with our families and our personal lives. But that's how important our democracy is. And that's why we were here, and we're here to bring our message. And so at this time, I'm happy to bring up to this podium the chairwoman of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, my friend, Representative Nicole Collier, chairman from Fort Worth, Texas.
Thank you. We are here today. My name is Nicole Collier. I am from Fort Worth, Texas, and we're here today because our backs have been against the wall. We had no other option. There was nothing left to give. And so we took a stand and we left the state of Texas because that was the best and the right thing to do at the right time. And let me tell you this, who decided that one constitutional right deserved greater deference than the other? I'll tell you who. That's Texas. Texas, the Republican legislature decided that your right to carry a gun was more important than your precious right to vote. That's right. We don't believe that one constitutional right deserves greater deference than the other. They're no greater than the all. They all deserve equal consideration and equal protection. And so we came today because we know that the Texas legislature, the Republican-led legislature, they're not trying to make these elections fair or free. It is not fair to require people to jump through hoops and fill out multiple forms just to vote. We're not free when people can be criminalized like Hervis Rogers for simple mistakes. We're not free when you promote the rights of partisan poll watchers over the rights of others. So we're not going to take it. We had the courage to take a stand, and Congress, we need you to finish it. I want to introduce my colleague and friend, the Speaker Pro Tem of the Texas Legislature, Representative Joe Moody from El Paso.
Hey, everyone, Joe Moody from El Paso, if you couldn't tell. The voter suppression going on in Texas is just the tip of the iceberg. The clock is literally ticking on Congress to act to protect voters in Texas and all across the country. We put everything on the line. The entire legislative branch of the Texas government has been zeroed out. Our budget has been zeroed out in an act of tyranny because we refused to pass a bill like they wanted to force through. A toxic piece of legislation. Now, lives of thousands of Texas public servants and the freedoms of millions of Texas voters are on the line. Now, I know this. We're here to fight.
That's right. That's right.
We just hope we're not alone. Because democracy itself sits at 1 minute to midnight. And we need immediate federal action to turn back the clock. Thank you.
Good job, man.
So, members of the press, we are planning a full press conference tomorrow morning where we'll visit with you more then. We'll take 3 questions right now.
Question for you. You said that you want to see this For the People Act passed at the federal level. That has had a vote. All Democrats voted to advance that debate. What has changed? What are you guys going to say here now in D.C. to try to change minds?
Sure. So what has changed is Texas is now in a special session to again pass an extreme anti-voter measure. It's going to make it more difficult for people to vote. And so we want to use this extreme example of what Greg Abbott and Republicans in Texas are doing to implore the Democratic senators to do what it takes to get the bill passed. And obviously that's a conversation about the filibuster, and I don't really care how they do it, but the reality is there are carve-outs on the filibuster in the U.S. Senate on different issues. We believe there's no more important issue than the right to vote for all American citizens to be able to cast a ballot, and we are going to communicate that to senators on Capitol Hill and to the American people more broadly, that is why we are doing this, and they have to act now.
Chris. John Lewis. CBS. To constituents who elected you to do a job, to be in Austin and debate these issues, and they see you leaving the state today, and they think they're running away from their responsibilities.
Nothing could be further from the truth. We are doing our jobs. We were elected to represent our constituents and fight for our constituents' interests, and that is why we are here. Because we're not going to sit in Austin, in the House chamber, and watch the Republican majority steamroll the voting rights of our constituents. And we're fighting back. We're leaving, so they can't do that. And we are using our collective voice to deliver a message to the Congress. We are fighting for our constituents.
How long will you be here in Washington?
Well, our intention is to be out of Texas until this session is over.
And if he calls another one right away?
That's our message to Congress. We need them to act now, because they will keep calling these sessions to pass voter suppression legislation. So we need Congress to act now. We've got about 3 weeks until this session is over. That the clock is ticking. They got to act before the August recess.
Last question.
Last question.
NBC News, Lauren Egan. President Biden is expected to talk about voting rights tomorrow. Would anything less than a call to abolish the filibuster be viewed as a disappointment from you all?
I'm glad the president is delivering the speech tomorrow. I'm looking forward to listening to it. And what I hope the president is going to say is that he expects the Congress to do what it takes to pass federal voting rights legislation, the For the People Act, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which is critically important for us in Texas to have both. So I'm looking forward to the president's words tomorrow. We'll visit with y'all more tomorrow. Thank you very much.
All right, so that was right on the tarmac. That's from a couple of hours ago as Texas state Democrats, almost 50 of them, landed in Washington, D.C. As a way to circumvent that special session of the legislature that was called to discuss, debate, and vote on Senate Bill 7. That's that massive electoral reform package that they did the same just about a month ago. Remember, they walked out of the legislature then. And so we've been kind of waiting for this moment. We kind of knew that they would do something like this yet again. We didn't know it would be this drastic, flying to Washington, D.C. We've spoken to a number of different people today about that story. The last time they did something like this was in 2003, and they merely just went across the border into Oklahoma in order to not meet quorum in order to vote on something like that. And so you heard there that they might have press conferences tomorrow or in the next couple of days, and we'll air those here on Live Now from Fox. We can make sure that we will get those to you once we get them and get more details on what exactly they'll be up to in Washington, D.C. for several weeks. So I'm Andrew Kraft. Thank you for being with us. We are going to go to just a quick 2-minute commercial break. When we come back, we have more news out of Haiti, also some news on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as well. So just a few more headlines to cap off the night here on this Monday night. We'll see you in 2 minutes. Back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us on your Monday night. Just a few more stories that we want to get to because we have been following all angles out of Haiti. The president, as you know, assassinated last week. Now arrests have been made, some of them linked to the United States. Some Haitian American citizens caught up in that, as well as some Colombian nationals. David Lee Miller has the latest on the investigation there in Haiti.
The investigation into the death of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse is ramping up. Police in the nation confirming they have already arrested more than 28 foreign mercenaries who they believe organized the assassination of Moïse. Interim Prime Minister Claude Joseph is hopeful everyone involved will be brought to justice.
The investigation is our main concern because a president cannot die under these conditions, which we know he has been tortured, humiliated in a tragic way.
Meanwhile, the White House has turned down calls from Haitian officials to send troops to assist in stabilizing the nation following Moïse's death. On Monday, the Biden team was briefed on the situation and vowed to protect the people of Haiti and the interests of the embattled nation.
The safety and security of the people of Haiti is of great interest to the president and to the administration. This is just the beginning of our conversations, and we will remain in close touch with law enforcement, with individuals in Haiti, with a range of leaders in Haiti about how we can assist and provide assistance moving forward.
Over the weekend, Haitian Americans in South Florida gathered for a memorial ceremony for the late Haitian president. Florida is home to the largest percentage of Haitian Americans in the United States. Residents are calling his death tragic, while some are still in disbelief over the death of Moise.
He was a supportive person. When I founded my first social initiative, he was one of the biggest supporters I had. We have to restore the democracy in our country.
A United States delegation is currently in Haiti, meeting with a number of top officials to discuss the ongoing investigation and the country's security. In New York, David Lee Miller, Fox News.
David, thanks so much for that update there. I want to reach you now. This was a statement we got in a couple of hours ago by the Department of Justice here at home. They said, at the request of the Haitian government, the Department of Justice, along with its U.S. government partners, is assisting the Haitian National Police in the investigation of the assassination of the Haitian president, Jovenel Moise. An initial assessment has been conducted in Haiti by senior U.S. officials. The department will continue to support the Haitian government in its review of the facts and circumstances surrounding this heinous attack. The department will also investigate whether there were any violations of U.S. criminal law in connection with this matter. So we'll be following all the angles of that going forward now, almost a week after that heinous, tragic attack there outside Port-au-Prince. Anyway, we want to move on to just our last top headline. I don't know if we've covered this today, but this has to do with the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine. We have some file video of Johnson & Johnson there. A rare immune system reaction is prompting another warning on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The Food and Drug Administration added the warning because of links to a rare and dangerous reaction, which causes muscle weakness and sometimes paralysis. The announcement came after the FDA and CDC reviewed about 100 cases of the disease in vaccine recipients. One person died, and almost all 100 were admitted into a hospital. Most of the cases were men, ages 50 and up, and they reported it about 2 weeks after their dose. Remember, the J&J vaccine is just one dose. Roughly 13 million people received the J&J vaccine so far this year. And so that rare and dangerous reaction, it's called Guillain-Barré syndrome. You may have heard of it, causing muscle weakness, sometimes paralysis. So anyway, we wanted to just alert you to that. That's a major development, the FDA having to slap that warning label on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Anyway, let's go out to some of these great live looks we have from around the country. Look at there, a foggy Bay Area at the moment. That's San Francisco in the distance. We also have New Orleans. This is in Louisiana at the moment. You can see the Superdome there and downtown, the downtown Big Easy. And then, of course, we have Philadelphia at the moment, the city of brotherly love there on the main boulevard. You can see kind of the steps up to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the same steps Sylvester Stallone ran up in the Rocky movies. And there's a statue of Rocky not too far from that place right there. So I want to thank everyone for watching. Myself and Daytona Everett chairing the desk here for the last couple of hours, bringing you the latest headlines, live, raw, and unfiltered from around the country and around the world. We're going to be doing it just same time, same place tomorrow as well. But don't forget, you can give Live Now from Fox a follow on Twitter. Our handle is at LiveNowFox. You may have noticed a recent name change. You can also go visit our website, livenowfox.com, for all of the latest and figuring out how you can watch us and where you can stream us. So that's where you can go for all of that information. But for all of us here, we will see you same time, same place tomorrow on Tuesday. Have a good night.
We call on the government of Cuba to refrain from violence, their attempts to silence the voice of the people of Cuba. And we're also closely following the developments in Haiti in the wake of the horrific assassination of the president that recently took place. The people of Haiti deserve peace and security, and Haiti's political leaders need to come together for the good of their country. Over the weekend, I dispatched a high-level expert delegation to assess the situation